Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Examination. Christopher Buchanan sat in the waiting room of Dr. Ted Ramsey's optometry clinic, scrolling through emails on his phone while his wife Jeanette underwent her annual eye exam. At 42, Chris had learned patience during his 12 years in military intelligence. But the mundane ritual of medical appointments still tested him. His security consulting firm was thriving, and he had 3 potential contracts waiting for his review. The couple had been married for 15 years, ever since Chris left the Army. Jeanette, a freelance graphic designer, had been experiencing mild headaches lately. Nothing serious, but enough to prompt today's visit. Their 2 children, Emma and Jake, were at school, blissfully unaware that this ordinary Tuesday would shatter their world. Chris had chosen Dr. Ramsey's practice because of its reputation and advanced diagnostic equipment. The optometrist was known throughout Denver for his thorough examinations and state-of-the-art retinal imaging technology. What should have been a routine visit was about to become anything but routine. "Mr. Buchanan?" Dr. Ramsey's voice carried an edge that made Chris look up from his phone. The optometrist stood in the doorway, his face unnaturally pale, hands trembling slightly as he gripped the doorframe. "Is everything all right, doctor?" Chris rose, immediately sensing something was wrong. His military training had taught him to read people, and Dr. Ramsey looked like a man who had seen something that violated the natural order of things. Could you come back here, please?" The optometrist's voice wavered, and he glanced nervously toward the examination rooms. Chris followed Dr. Ramsey down the hallway, noting how the man's shoulders were rigid with tension. They passed the examination room where Jeanette waited, her eyes still dilated from the drops, looking confused at the sudden change in atmosphere. In his office, Dr. Ramsey closed the door and turned to face Chris. The man had been practicing for 15 years, had seen everything from rare genetic conditions to severe injuries, but whatever was on his computer screen had shaken him to his core. "Sir, I need you to get your children and leave the city," Dr. Ramsey said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do not go home." What? Chris felt his blood turn to ice. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Ramsey's hand shook as he turned his monitor toward Chris. "It's horrifying. I've never seen this in my 15-year career." On the screen was Jeanette's retinal scan, but embedded within the natural patterns of blood vessels and optic nerve tissue were tiny, geometric structures that definitely didn't belong in human anatomy. They looked almost like circuitry, microscopic, artificial, and clearly foreign. Chris stared at the image, his mind racing. The structures were so small, they were barely visible even with the high-resolution equipment, but they formed a distinct pattern across Jeanette's retina. It looked like some kind of network with interconnected nodes that pulsed faintly with an almost imperceptible light. "What the hell is that?" Chris's voice was steady, but his military training was already kicking in, analyzing threats and calculating responses. "I don't know," Dr. Ramsey whispered, "but I've seen something similar once before, about 2 years ago. A patient came in with similar structures. 3 days later, she was found dead in her apartment. The police called it a suicide, but he trailed off, unable to finish the thought." Chris felt the world shift beneath his feet. Someone had done this to his wife. Someone had implanted something in her eyes without her knowledge or consent. The implications were staggering. How long had they been watching her? What were they planning? "Doctor, I need you to copy this scan to a secure drive," Chris said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used when briefing colonels and generals. "Then I need you to delete it from your system and forget this conversation ever happened." Dr. Ramsey nodded quickly, his hands still trembling as he began transferring the files. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever it takes to protect my family," Chris replied, already formulating plans. His mind was shifting into operational mode, cataloging resources, identifying potential threats, and calculating the best ways to disappear. 20 minutes later, Chris walked calmly back to the examination room where Jeanette waited. She looked up at him with concern, noting the tension in his posture despite his attempt to appear normal. "Everything okay? Honey, she asked, squinting slightly as her vision was still adjusting. Just some paperwork issues with the insurance, Chris lied smoothly. Dr. Ramsey needs to reschedule some follow-up tests. We should go. As they left the clinic, Chris was already calculating their next moves. He had to get the children from school without raising suspicion, gather essential supplies, and disappear before whoever was behind this realized their surveillance had been discovered. The secure phone in his pocket contained contact from his military days, people who could help them vanish if necessary. But first, he needed answers. The retinal implants weren't random. They were sophisticated, expensive, and required incredible technological resources to implement. This wasn't the work of common criminals or even typical government surveillance. This was something bigger, more sinister, and far more personal than Chris had initially realized. As they drove toward the elementary school, Chris caught Jeanette looking at him in the rearview mirror. "Chris, you're scaring me. What's really going on?" He met her eyes in the mirror, seeing the trust and love that had sustained them through 15 years of marriage. "I promise I'll explain everything once we're safe. But right now, I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that?" She nodded without hesitation, and Chris felt a surge of gratitude for the strength of their partnership. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. But first, he had to get his family to safety and figure out who had violated his wife in such an intimate, technological way. The game had begun, but Chris Buchanan was no ordinary opponent. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The safe house was a cabin Chris had purchased 3 years earlier under a shell corporation, a precaution from his consulting days that was now proving invaluable. Located 40 miles outside Denver in the foothills, it was isolated enough to provide security while maintaining internet connectivity for his investigation. Emma and Jake had been surprisingly adaptable to their sudden camping trip, though 13-year-old Emma was beginning to ask pointed questions about why they couldn't go home. Chris had collected them from school with a story about a gas leak at the house, buying himself time to formulate a longer-term plan. Now, as the children slept in the cabin's loft, Chris sat at his laptop analyzing the retinal scan Dr. Ramsey had provided. Jeanette was beside him, finally learning the truth about what had been discovered in her eyes. "So these things, they're watching me?" Jeanette's voice was steady, but Chris could see the fear in her eyes. "More than watching," Chris replied, manipulating the image to highlight the microscopic structures. "These aren't just passive surveillance devices. Look at the pattern. They're networked, which means they can transmit and receive data. Someone has essentially turned your eyes into biological surveillance cameras." Chris had been running the scan through various analysis programs, comparing it to military intelligence databases he still had access to through former contacts. What he'd found was both illuminating and terrifying. "The technology level is extraordinary," he continued, pulling up comparative images on his screen. "This is beyond anything I've seen in classified military projects. We're talking about nanotechnology that's at least a decade ahead of anything publicly available." Jeanette wrapped her arms around herself. "How would they do this to me? When? I've never had any kind of eye surgery. That's what I've been trying to figure out." Chris opened another window on his laptop, displaying a timeline he'd been constructing. "I've been going through your medical history, your appointments, anywhere you might have been exposed to this technology." The breakthrough had come when Chris cross-referenced Jeanette's schedule with recent technological patents. 3 months earlier, Jeanette had participated in a focus group for a new virtual reality interface system. The company had been offering substantial compensation for participants willing to test their revolutionary eye-tracking technology. "Nexus Dynamics," Chris said, pointing to the company name on his screen. "They paid you $800 for a 3-hour session to test their VR system. Do you remember anything unusual about that day?" Jeanette thought back, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It was pretty standard, actually. They had me wear this headset and look at various images and videos. The only odd thing was that they gave me eye drops beforehand, said it would help with the calibration." Chris felt his jaw tighten. Eye drops. That was the delivery method. They anesthetized your eyes and implanted these devices during the calibration session. But as Chris dug deeper into Nexus Dynamics, he discovered that the company was a front. The real owner, hidden behind layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts, was someone Chris recognized from his military intelligence days, Frederick Moore. Moore was a defense contractor who had made billions developing surveillance technology for various government agencies. 5 years ago, Chris had been part of a military intelligence unit that investigated Moore's company for potential human rights violations in their overseas operations. The investigation had been shut down abruptly, and Chris had always suspected that Moore had powerful friends protecting him. "This son of a bitch," Chris muttered, staring at Moore's photograph on his screen. Frederick Moore was a thin, pale man with cold blue eyes and a perpetual sneer that suggested he viewed other people as lab rats. "You know him?" Jeanette asked, noting the anger in her husband's voice. "Frederick Moore. I encountered him during my military service. He's a defense contractor who specializes in surveillance and psychological warfare technology. He's also completely without conscience when it comes to human experimentation." Chris pulled up Moore's file, revealing a pattern of unethical behavior spanning decades. There were reports of unauthorized drug testing on employees, illegal surveillance of family members of government officials, and suspected involvement in several mysterious deaths of former associates. "But why me?" Jeanette asked. "I'm nobody special. I'm a graphic designer from suburban Denver." Chris had been wondering the same thing until he made another connection. "It's not about you specifically, it's about me. Moore knows who I am, and he knows I was part of the investigation into his operations. You're not his target, you're his way of getting to me." The implications were chilling. Moore had been using Jeanette as an unwitting surveillance device, monitoring their family's activities, conversations, and movements. Every intimate moment, every private discussion, every aspect of their lives had been compromised. "There's something else," Chris said, his voice grim. Dr. Ramsey mentioned that he'd seen this before in a patient who died 3 days later. "I think Moore has been testing this technology on multiple subjects, probably using them to gather intelligence on various targets." Chris began cross-referencing missing persons reports with the locations of Nexus Dynamics focus groups. The pattern was undeniable. People who had participated in these sessions were disappearing or dying under suspicious circumstances. "He's been using innocent people as test subjects for his surveillance network," Chris realized. "And when they're no longer useful, or when someone gets too close to discovering the truth." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Both he and Jeanette understood the implications. "So what do we do?" Jeanette asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Chris looked at his wife, seeing the strength and determination that had attracted him to her all those years ago. "We can't go to the authorities. Moore has too many connections, and we don't know how deep his influence goes. We can't run forever, either. Eventually, he'll track us down. So we fight back," Jeanette said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Chris nodded, feeling a familiar surge of the tactical mindset that had served him well in military intelligence. "We fight back, but we do it smart, and we do it in a way that ensures he can never threaten our family again." As Chris began formulating his plan, he reflected on the resources at his disposal. His security consulting business had put him in contact with various specialists, people who operated in the gray areas between legal and illegal, who had skills that would be invaluable in the coming conflict. Frederick Moore had made a critical error. He had threatened the family of someone who possessed both the skills and the motivation to destroy him completely. The man who had spent years perfecting surveillance and psychological warfare was about to discover what it felt like to be hunted by someone who understood those games better than he did. The war between Christopher Buchanan and Frederick Moore was about to begin, and Chris intended to make sure it ended with Moore's complete and utter destruction. Chapter 3: The History of Enemies. Chris spent the early morning hours in the cabin's basement, which he had converted into a secure communication center during his first year of consulting work. Multiple encrypted hard drives contained files from his military intelligence days, information that officially didn't exist but could prove invaluable in understanding Frederick Moore's operations and psychology. The history between Chris and Moore went back 7 years to a classified operation in Eastern Europe. Chris had been a captain in military intelligence, assigned to investigate reports that Moore's defense contracting company was testing experimental psychological warfare techniques on civilian populations in war-torn regions. The evidence had been damning. Moore's company, operating under the cover of humanitarian aid, had been administering experimental drugs and psychological conditioning techniques to refugees in several camps. The goal was to create a population that could be more easily controlled and manipulated, a testbed for techniques that could later be applied to domestic populations. Chris's investigation had uncovered evidence of hundreds of deaths, psychological torture, and human experimentation that violated every international treaty on human rights. But when he presented his findings to his superiors, the investigation was suddenly classified and buried. Within a month, Chris found himself reassigned to a desk job in Colorado, effectively ending his military career trajectory. What Chris had never known until now was that Moore had been aware of the investigation from the beginning. The defense contractor had files on every member of Chris's team, including detailed psychological profiles and information about their families. Moore had been playing a long game, waiting for the right moment to strike back at the man who had nearly exposed his operations. "He's been watching us for years," Chris muttered, studying surveillance photos that Moore's organization had compiled. The images showed Jeanette at the grocery store, the children at their school, even Chris himself at various client meetings for his consulting business. But Moore had made a mistake in his patience. The years had given Chris time to build his own network of contacts and resources. His security consulting business wasn't just a cover. It was a legitimate operation that had put him in touch with former special operations soldiers, intelligence analysts, private investigators, and other specialists who operated in the shadow world between legal and illegal activities. One of his key assets was Jordan Eastman, a former Army Ranger who now ran a small but highly effective private security firm. Jordan specialized in what he euphemistically called problem resolution, handling situations that required skills and methods that conventional law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't employ. Chris made an encrypted phone call, knowing that Jordan would answer despite the early hour. "Buchanan." Jordan's gravelly voice came through the secure line. "I was wondering when you'd call. Word is you've dropped off the grid. How much do you know?" Chris asked, aware that information traveled fast in their specialized community. "Enough to know that Frederick Moore has been asking questions about your family. My sources say he's been unusually active lately, moving money and resources around like he's preparing for something big." Chris felt a chill of confirmation. Moore wasn't just conducting surveillance. He was preparing for the next phase of his plan. "I need a full workup on Moore's current operations," Chris said. "Personnel, locations, financial structures, everything. And I need it done quietly. What's your timeline?" "Yesterday," Chris replied. "Jordan, this bastard has done something to my wife. Something that involves experimental technology and puts my entire family at risk." There was a pause on the line, and when Jordan spoke again, his voice had taken on the cold, professional tone that Chris remembered from their military days. "I'll have preliminary information to you by tonight. Full package within 72 hours. What else do you need?" "Clean identities for my family, if we need to disappear permanently, and access to some of the specialists you keep on retainer. Consider done." "But Chris, Moore has serious resources and no moral limitations. If you're going up against him, you better be prepared to play by his rules." Chris looked up at the ceiling, where he could hear his children moving around as they started their day. "I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to protect my family." After ending the call, Chris returned his attention to Moore's psychological profile. The man was a classic narcissistic psychopath, intelligent, manipulative, and completely lacking in empathy. But he also had weaknesses that could be exploited. Moore's primary vulnerability was his ego. He saw himself as intellectually superior to everyone around him, which led him to overcomplicate his schemes and underestimate his opponents. He also had a pathological need for control, which meant he would struggle to adapt when his plans were disrupted. Chris began sketching the outline of his revenge plan. It would need to be multifaceted, hitting Moore's operations, his finances, his reputation, and his sense of personal security simultaneously. The goal wasn't just to stop Moore's surveillance of his family, but to destroy the man completely, ensuring he could never threaten anyone again. The plan would also need to account for Moore's government connections. The defense contractor had allies in various agencies who had benefited from his technology and information. Chris would need to isolate Moore from his support network before delivering the killing blow. As Jeanette and the children came downstairs for breakfast, Chris minimized the screens and tried to appear normal. But Emma, his perceptive 13-year-old, immediately noticed his tension. "Dad, you look like you're planning a war," she said, settling down at the table with her cereal. Chris exchanged a look with Jeanette, who nodded slightly. Their daughter was old enough to understand that something serious was happening, and lying to her would only increase her anxiety. "Emma, Jake," Chris said, his voice gentle but serious. "Your mom and I need to tell you something important about why we're staying here for a while." Over the next half hour, Chris and Jeanette explained the situation in terms the children could understand. They focused on the surveillance aspect rather than the more sinister implications, but they made it clear that someone had violated their family's privacy and safety. "So what are you going to do about it?" Jake asked, his 10-year-old sense of justice clearly offended by the situation. "I'm going to make sure this person can never hurt our family or anyone else's family ever again," Chris replied. Emma studied her father's face with the intensity that reminded him so much of her mother. "You're going to fight back, aren't you? Like really fight back?" "Yes," Chris said simply. "But I need you both to understand that this means we have to be very careful and very smart. We're dealing with someone dangerous, and the most important thing is keeping all of us safe." Both children nodded solemnly, and Chris felt a surge of pride at their maturity and resilience. They were Buchanans, and Buchanans didn't back down from fights that mattered. Later that afternoon, as the children played video games and Jeanette worked on her laptop, Chris received the first batch of intelligence from Jordan. Moore's operations were even more extensive than Chris had realized, with tentacles reaching into government agencies, private corporations, and criminal organizations across multiple countries. But the intelligence also revealed something else. Moore was vulnerable. His empire was built on secrecy and fear, and he had made numerous enemies over the years. Chris began to see how he could turn those enemies into allies, using Moore's own methods against him. The war was about to begin, and Christopher Buchanan intended to wage it with the same ruthless efficiency that had made him one of the military's top intelligence officers. Frederick Moore had awakened a sleeping dragon, and he was about to learn why that was a fatal mistake. Chapter 4. Building the Arsenal. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Denver had once housed Chris's security consulting firm's equipment storage, but now it served a darker purpose. Over the past week, it had become the staging ground for an operation that would have impressed his former military commanders with its scope and complexity. Jordan Eastman stood beside a table covered with surveillance equipment, weapons, and electronic devices, briefing Chris on the assets he had assembled. "I've got 6 specialists on standby," Jordan said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Each one has a specific grudge against Moore or his organization." The team Jordan had assembled was a carefully curated collection of individuals whose lives had been disrupted or destroyed by Frederick Moore's operations. There was Wayne Peterson, a former NSA analyst who had been blacklisted after refusing to cooperate with one of Moore's illegal data harvesting schemes. Danny Gay was an ex-CIA operative whose family had been killed in a terrorist attack that Danny was convinced was actually a Moore-sponsored false flag operation designed to justify increased surveillance funding. "Moore doesn't just make enemies," Jordan explained. "He creates people who have nothing left to lose. That makes them incredibly dangerous to him." Chris studied the dossiers of each team member, impressed by Jordan's recruitment strategy. Rather than hiring random mercenaries, he had found people with personal vendettas against Moore, individuals who would fight with the dedication of true believers rather than mere employees. "What about his security?" Chris asked, examining the architectural plans of Moore's primary residence and corporate headquarters. "Extensive, but predictable," Wayne Peterson spoke up, his voice carrying the analytical precision of his NSA background. "Moore relies heavily on electronic surveillance and automated systems. He's overconfident in his technology, which creates vulnerabilities. Wayne had been mapping Moore's security networks for the past 3 days, identifying weak points and potential entry vectors. The man who built his fortune on surveillance has a blind spot when it comes to human intelligence and social engineering. Chris nodded, recognizing the tactical opportunity. Moore's reliance on technology meant he would be vulnerable to attacks that exploited human psychology and social manipulation, areas where Chris excelled. "What's our financial situation?" Chris asked, knowing that an operation of this scope would require substantial resources. Jordan smiled grimly. Moore made another mistake when he started this war. 3 years ago, he tried to muscle in on some contracts that belonged to people I know. They've been looking for payback ever since, and they're willing to finance our operation. The funding was coming from a consortium of defense contractors and private military companies that had been victimized by Moore's predatory business practices. They were providing not just money, but access to specialized equipment and intelligence that would be crucial to the operation's success. "We have a budget of $2 million in access to military-grade surveillance and communication equipment," Jordan continued. "We also have friends in several government agencies who are tired of Moore's influence and are willing to look the other way when we make our move." Chris felt a familiar surge of excitement that he remembered from his military planning days. The pieces were falling into place, and he could see how the operation would unfold across multiple phases. Phase 1 is intelligence, gathering, and preparation, Chris explained to the team. "We need complete situational awareness of Moore's operations, his personnel, his routines, and his security measures. Wayne, I want you coordinating electronic surveillance and data analysis." Phase 2 is isolation, Chris continued, pointing to a whiteboard where he had begun mapping Moore's network of allies and resources. "We need to systematically undermine his support structure, his political connections, his business relationships, his sources of protection." Danny Gay leaned forward, his eyes bright with anticipation. "And Phase 3? Phase 3 is the reckoning," Chris said simply. "We destroy Moore completely, his business, his reputation, his freedom, and his ability to ever threaten innocent people again." The room fell silent as the team absorbed the implications of what Chris was proposing. This wasn't just about stopping Moore's surveillance operation or protecting Chris's family. This was about completely dismantling a criminal empire that had operated with impunity for decades. "What about collateral damage?" asked Leah Pennington, a former military contractor who specialized in psychological operations. "Moore has hundreds of employees, many of whom are probably innocent." Chris had been anticipating this question. "We target the leadership and the core criminal operations. Innocent employees will be given opportunities to distance themselves before we strike. But anyone who knowingly participates in human experimentation or illegal surveillance activities is fair game." Over the next several hours, the team refined their operational plan. They would begin with passive surveillance, mapping Moore's daily routines and identifying vulnerabilities in his security. Simultaneously, they would start a campaign of economic warfare, using insider information to attack his business interests and financial resources. The psychological warfare component would be crucial. Chris knew that Moore's narcissistic personality meant he would become increasingly reckless as he felt his control slipping. The key was to apply pressure gradually, making Moore react emotionally rather than strategically. "What about your family?" Jordan asked as the briefing concluded. "They'll need to remain hidden until this is over." Chris had already made arrangements. His children were enrolled in a private school under assumed names, and Jeanette was working remotely under a new identity. The cabin remained their base, but Chris had established several backup locations in case they needed to relocate quickly. "They're protected and prepared," Chris replied. "Jeanette understands what we're doing and why it's necessary. The kids think this is an extended adventure. I intend to keep it that way." As the team dispersed to begin their preparations, Chris remained in the warehouse, studying satellite photos of Moore's compound. The man who had violated his wife and threatened his family was about to learn what it meant to face an opponent who combined military training, intelligence experience, and a desperate motivation of a father protecting his children. Chris pulled out his secure phone and sent a brief, encrypted message to Jeanette. "The hunt begins tomorrow. I love you." Her response came back almost immediately. "Bring them down, soldier. We're proud of you." Christopher Buchanan smiled grimly as he turned off the lights in the warehouse. Frederick Moore had started a war against the wrong family, and now he was about to discover just how expensive that mistake would be. Chapter 5: The First Strike. The Nexus Dynamics corporate headquarters in downtown Denver was a gleaming 40-story monument to Frederick Moore's technological empire. But at 3:17 a.m. on a Thursday morning, it became ground zero for Chris's opening salvo in their private war. Wayne Peterson's fingers flew across multiple keyboards in the back of a modified van parked 6 blocks from the building. "I'm inside their primary server," he reported through his headset. "Their security is impressive, but they made the classic mistake of trusting their own technology too much." Chris watched from a rooftop across the street as Danny Gay and 2 other team members moved through the building's lower levels. They had gained access through a maintenance tunnel that Wayne had identified in the building's architectural plans, a vulnerability that existed precisely because more security focused on high-tech solutions rather than basic physical security. "Package delivered." Danny's voice crackled through the comm system. 20 minutes to showtime." The package was a collection of devices that would simultaneously disrupt Moore's surveillance network and plant evidence of his illegal activities in locations where federal investigators would be certain to find it. Chris had spent weeks studying Moore's psychological profile, and he knew the man would respond to this attack with predictable arrogance and escalation. "Wayne, initiate Phase 1 Alpha," Chris commanded, watching through his binoculars as lights began flickering throughout the Nexus building. What followed was a precisely choreographed technological assault. Wayne systematically crashed Moore's surveillance systems while simultaneously uploading terabytes of data to secure servers. The data included evidence of Moore's human experimentation programs, financial records showing illegal government contracts, and most damning of all, recordings of Moore discussing the elimination of problematic test subjects. But Chris's masterstroke was more subtle. Hidden within the legitimate evidence were carefully crafted pieces of disinformation designed to make Moore believe that several of his closest associates were betraying him. Chris knew that Moore's paranoid personality would lead him to turn on his own allies, fracturing his organization from within. The psychological warfare component was already beginning. For the past week, Moore's employees had been receiving anonymous emails containing evidence of their boss's illegal activities. Many of them were already contacting lawyers and federal agents, seeking immunity deals in exchange for their cooperation. "Building secure," Danny reported. "All personnel evacuated through the emergency protocols. No casualties, no witnesses." Chris nodded, satisfied with the first phase's execution. "All teams, exfiltrate to Rally Point Alpha. Phase 1 Bravo initiates in 6 hours." As the team withdrew from the area, Chris remained on the rooftop, watching as federal agents began arriving at the Nexus building. Wayne's handiwork had triggered automatic alerts to multiple government agencies, ensuring that Moore's illegal activities would be investigated simultaneously by the FBI, DEA, and several military intelligence units. But the real genius of the plan was its timing. Moore was currently attending a defense contractors conference in Washington, D.C., surrounded by government officials and potential allies. The raid on his headquarters would force him to choose between maintaining his public image and rushing back to Denver to handle the crisis personally. Chris's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from one of Jordan's contacts in the FBI. "Package received. Authorization granted for full investigation. Your intel is solid gold." Phase 1 Bravo began at 9:30 a.m., just as Moore was scheduled to give a keynote presentation to a group of Pentagon officials. Chris watched the live stream from his laptop as Moore took the stage, completely unaware that his world was collapsing in real time. The presentation lasted exactly 12 minutes before Moore's assistant rushed onto the stage and whispered urgently in his ear. Chris watched with satisfaction as Moore's face went pale, then flushed with anger, as he processed the information about the raid on his headquarters. Moore made his first critical error at that moment. Instead of handling the crisis with calm professionalism, he stormed off the stage and began making increasingly frantic phone calls. The defense officials in attendance noted his loss of composure, and several contracts that had been under consideration were quietly withdrawn. "He's taking the bait," Jordan reported from his observation post outside Moore's D.C. hotel. 3 black SUVs just left for the airport. "He's coming home." Chris smiled grimly. Moore's predictable response was playing directly into the trap. By rushing back to Denver in a panic, he was abandoning his political allies and isolating himself exactly where Chris wanted him. But Moore's return journey became an additional opportunity for psychological warfare. During his flight, Moore discovered that his corporate accounts had been frozen by federal investigators. His personal communications were being monitored, and several of his key employees had been arrested on charges ranging from conspiracy to human rights violations. The most devastating blow came when Moore landed at Denver International Airport and discovered that his own security team had been compromised. 3 of his bodyguards were arrested on outstanding warrants that Wayne had arranged to be activated, while 2 others simply failed to show up for duty, a result of Danny's persuasive conversations about the legal consequences of protecting a wanted criminal. "He's isolated, angry, and making emotional decisions," Chris reported to his team as they prepared for Phase 2. Textbook psychological breakdown of a narcissistic personality under pressure. But Chris knew that Moore was still dangerous, perhaps more so now that he was desperate. The next phase of the plan would require careful timing and precise execution, because a cornered enemy with Moore's resources could still inflict significant damage. As Chris drove back to the warehouse to brief his team on Phase 2, he reflected on how perfectly the opening gambit had unfolded. In less than 24 hours, they had crippled Moore's surveillance network, triggered federal investigations that would occupy his attention and resources, and isolated him from his support structure. More importantly, they had forced Moore to react rather than act, putting Chris's team in control of the tempo and direction of their conflict. The man who had built his empire on patient manipulation and careful planning was now operating in crisis mode, making the kinds of mistakes that Chris could exploit. Chris's secure phone buzzed with a message from Jeanette, saw the news about Nexus Dynamics. "Are you okay?" His response was brief, but filled with satisfaction. Phase 1 complete. "Our family will be safe soon." Frederick Moore had started this war by violating Chris's family with his surveillance technology. Now Chris was systematically dismantling Moore's life using the same methodical precision that had made him one of the military's top intelligence officers. The hunter had become the hunted, and Moore was about to learn what it felt like to be prey. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs Shut. The emergency meeting at Moore's private estate in Aspen represented exactly the kind of tactical mistake that Chris had been hoping to provoke. Desperate to regain control of his collapsing empire, Moore had summoned his remaining loyal associates to his most secure location, a decision that would prove to be his downfall. Chris studied the estate through high-powered binoculars from a concealed position on the adjacent mountainside. The sprawling compound was a testament to Moore's paranoia, featuring multiple security perimeters, armed guards, and surveillance systems that would have impressed a government installation. 17 personnel confirmed on-site, Wayne Peterson reported from his mobile command center, including Moore, his personal security team, and 6 key operational leaders. "This is everyone we've been trying to get close to for weeks." The beauty of Chris's strategy was that Moore's paranoid personality had led him to gather all his most valuable targets in a single location, believing his estate's security made him invulnerable. But Chris had spent the past month studying the compound's weaknesses, and he had identified several vulnerabilities that Moore's overconfidence had created. "Phase 2 Alpha is go," Chris commanded, watching as Danny Gay and his infiltration team began their approach through the estate's blind spots. "Remember, we need them alive and talking." The plan required perfect timing and coordination. While Danny's team neutralized the external security, Wayne would crash the compound's electronic systems, cutting off Moore's communications and trapping the conspirators inside their own fortress. But the most crucial element was the psychological component. Chris had arranged for Moore to receive a series of messages that would convince him that the attack was coming from his former government allies, who had decided to eliminate him as a liability. The goal was to make Moore believe that his own paranoid worldview was correct, that everyone around him was betraying him. Perimeter security neutralized, Danny reported, his voice calm and professional despite the complexity of the operation. Moving to Phase 2 Bravo. Chris watched through his binoculars as the compound's lights flickered and died, leaving the estate in darkness except for emergency lighting. Wayne's electronic warfare had been perfectly executed, creating confusion and panic among Moore's team while preserving the compound's internal surveillance systems for Chris's use. The next 30 minutes unfolded with military precision. Danny's team systematically captured Moore's associates, using non-lethal methods that left them conscious but immobilized. Each capture was recorded by the compound's own security cameras, creating evidence that would be invaluable in the coming legal proceedings. Moore himself was the final target, found barricaded in his secure communications room, frantically trying to contact his government allies for rescue. Chris's psychological warfare had been successful. Moore genuinely believed that he was being eliminated by his former partners rather than hunted by the family he had violated. Package secured, Danny reported as his team extracted Moore from the communications room. Subject is conscious and cooperative. Chris made his way down the mountainside to the compound, his heart pounding with anticipation. After months of planning and execution, he was finally face-to-face with the man who had threatened his family. Moore was secured in his own conference room, surrounded by evidence of his crimes that Chris's team had carefully arranged for maximum psychological impact. The man who had once seemed so powerful and threatening now appeared small and pathetic, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face pale with fear. "Frederick Moore," Chris said as he entered the room, noting how Moore's eyes widened with recognition. "I don't think we were ever formally introduced." Christopher Buchanan, military intelligence, retired. Moore's composure cracked completely. You're the bastard who tried to destroy my operation in Eastern Europe." Chris smiled coldly. "I didn't try to destroy it. I'm going to succeed this time. You made a critical error when you decided to use my wife as a test subject for your surveillance technology." "Your wife?" Moore's confusion was genuine. "That was just random selection for product testing." "She wasn't." "I didn't know." Chris felt a surge of anger at Moore's casual dismissal of the violation he had inflicted on Jeanette. "You implanted surveillance devices in my wife's eyes without her knowledge or consent. You turned her into an unwitting spy against her own family. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Moore's expression shifted from confusion to calculation as he began to understand the scope of Chris's revenge operation. "The federal raids, the financial attacks, the systematic destruction of my network, that was all you?" "That was just the beginning," Chris replied. "Wayne, show Mr. Moore what we've prepared for the finale." Wayne activated a large monitor in the conference room, displaying a comprehensive presentation of evidence that would be released simultaneously to multiple media outlets, government agencies, and international human rights organizations. The evidence included not just Moore's recent activities, but decades of crimes that Chris's team had uncovered during their investigation. "Everything," Chris said, watching Moore's face as he processed the scope of the evidence against him. "Every illegal experiment, every murdered witness, every government official you've bribed, every family you've destroyed. All of it will be released unless you cooperate fully with authorities and make full restitution to your victims." Moore's psychological breakdown accelerated as he realized the impossibility of his situation. "You can't prove half of this. My government connections will protect me." "Your government connections are already distancing themselves from you," Chris replied. 3 of your Pentagon contacts were arrested this morning. 2 senators have called for investigations into your contracts. And your CIA liaison has been reassigned to a desk job in Alaska. Chris pulled out a legal document that had been prepared by attorneys working with the victims' families. "You have a choice, Frederick. You can cooperate with authorities, plead guilty to the charges against you, and serve your time in a minimum security federal prison. Or you can fight this in court and spend the rest of your life in a maximum security facility after every detail of your crimes becomes public knowledge." Moore stared at the document, his hands trembling as he began to understand that his empire was truly finished. "What about my family?" My children. Chris felt a moment of sympathy, remembering his own children who were still living under assumed names in a safe house. But then he thought of Jeanette's violated eyes and the dozens of other victims who had suffered under Moore's experiments. Your family will be protected and provided for, but they'll also live with the knowledge of what you've done. That's more consideration than you showed my family or any of your other victims. The document Moore signed that night was comprehensive and devastating. In exchange for protective custody and a reduced sentence, he provided complete testimony about his illegal activities, named his co-conspirators, and agreed to forfeit his assets to a victim compensation fund. As federal agents arrived to take Moore into custody, Chris stepped outside the compound and called Jeanette on his secure phone. "It's over," he said simply. "He's in custody, his organization is destroyed, and the surveillance devices will be removed from your eyes within the week." Jeanette's relief was audible even through the encrypted connection. "Are we safe? Can we go home?" Chris looked back at the compound where Frederick Moore was being led away in handcuffs, his criminal empire reduced to boxes of evidence and testimony that would keep prosecutors busy for years. "We're safe," he confirmed. "The threat is neutralized, and there's no one left to come after us. We can go home." As Chris drove away from the compound, he reflected on the completeness of his victory. Moore's organization had been dismantled, his co-conspirators were facing prosecution, and his victims would receive both justice and compensation. Most importantly, no family would ever again suffer the violation that Moore had inflicted on the Buchanans. The hunter had successfully become the hunted, and Christopher Buchanan had proven that some enemies should never underestimate the determination of a father protecting his family. Chapter 7. Reckoning. 3 weeks after Moore's arrest, Chris sat in the sterile white room of the Colorado Medical Center, holding Jeanette's hand as Dr. Elena Chung prepared to remove the surveillance devices from her eyes. The procedure was delicate but routine. Dr. Chung was one of the world's leading experts in ocular nanotechnology, and she had successfully removed similar devices from 7 other victims of Moore's experiments. "The good news is that there appears to be no permanent damage," Dr. Chung explained as she reviewed the latest scans. Moore's technology was sophisticated, but it was designed to be reversible. He apparently wanted to be able to extract his devices if necessary. Chris squeezed Jeanette's hand, feeling a complex mixture of relief and lingering anger. The physical violation could be repaired, but the psychological impact of knowing their privacy had been invaded so completely would take longer to heal. "How many others were there?" Jeanette asked, though Chris could tell she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 43 confirmed cases, Dr. Chung replied. Moore had been testing his technology for over 2 years, using it to gather intelligence on government officials, business competitors, and law enforcement personnel. Your husband's investigation exposed the largest domestic surveillance conspiracy in U.S. history. The scope of Moore's operation had become clear during his debriefing with federal authorities. The surveillance network had extended far beyond simple espionage. Moore had been selling access to his unwitting test subjects to foreign intelligence agencies, criminal organizations, and anyone willing to pay for intimate access to their targets' lives. "The federal prosecutor wants to meet with us next week," Chris said, having received the call that morning. "Moore's plea agreement includes full cooperation, but they want our testimony to ensure the case against his co-conspirators is airtight." The legal proceedings were already generating national headlines. Moore's confession had implicated dozens of government officials, corporate executives, and foreign agents in a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of American society. Congressional hearings were scheduled, and several cabinet-level officials had already resigned rather than face investigation. But for Chris, the most satisfying aspect of the aftermath was watching Moore's psychological disintegration during his imprisonment. The man who had built his identity around control and manipulation was now confined to a small cell, facing the rest of his life behind bars while his former victims testified about the horrors he had inflicted on them. "Dr. Chung," Chris said as the surgeon prepared her instruments, "I want to watch the procedure. I need to see these things being removed from my wife's eyes." Dr. Chung nodded understandingly. Many of the family members have requested the same thing. It provides closure to actually witness the violation being undone. The procedure took 90 minutes, during which Chris watched with grim fascination as the microscopic devices were carefully extracted from Jeanette's retinal tissue. Each device was no larger than a grain of sand, but together they had formed a sophisticated surveillance network that had transmitted every visual detail of their lives to Moore's monitoring stations. "There," Dr. Chung said as she removed the final device. "That's the last one. Mrs. Buchanan, you're officially free of Frederick Moore's invasion of your privacy." Jeanette's eyes were bandaged for the recovery period, but Chris could see the tension leaving her body as she processed the reality that the surveillance was finally over. "I can't believe something so small could cause so much terror and disruption in our lives." "That was exactly Moore's intention," Chris replied. "He wanted his victims to feel helpless and violated." The technology wasn't just about surveillance. It was about psychological control. Later that evening, as Jeanette rested at the cabin with her eyes protected, Chris received a call from Jordan Eastman with an update on the cleanup operations. Moore's remaining associates are either in custody or cooperating with authorities, Jordan reported. The whole network has collapsed. Wayne estimates it'll take investigators about 5 years to fully document all the crimes they committed. Chris felt a deep sense of satisfaction at the thoroughness of their victory. What about the international connections? Interpol has issued warrants for 12 foreign operatives who are buying intelligence from Moore. 3 governments have launched their own investigations into officials who were compromised by his surveillance network. This thing is going global. The international ramifications were still unfolding. More surveillance data had been used to blackmail foreign officials, manipulate business transactions, and even influence political elections in several countries. The diplomatic consequences would likely continue for years. "The kids are asking when they can go back to their regular school," Chris said, thinking of Emma and Jake, who were still living under their assumed identities. "Give it another month," Jordan advised. "We want to be absolutely certain that all of Moore's associates are accounted for before we expose your family to any potential retaliation." Chris understood the caution, but he was eager for his family to return to normal life. The past months had been a testament to their resilience, but Emma and Jake deserved to be children again, not refugees from their father's war against a criminal conspiracy. The next morning brought news that provided Chris with perfect closure to the Moore saga. His former adversary had attempted suicide in his federal holding cell, but had been unsuccessful due to the careful monitoring of high-value prisoners. Moore would live to serve his full sentence, a minimum of 45 years without possibility of parole. "He tried to take the easy way out," Chris told Jeanette as he read her the news report. "But he doesn't get to escape that easily. He'll spend the rest of his life knowing that his victims survived and thrived while his empire crumbled to dust." Dr. Chung called that afternoon with news that Jeanette's recovery was proceeding perfectly. The removal sites were healing without complications, and her vision would be completely normal within another week. "There's something else," Dr. Chung added. "The devices we removed from your wife were more sophisticated than the ones we've seen in other victims." Moore was using her as a test subject for his most advanced surveillance technology. Chris felt his anger flare again at the reminder of how specifically his family had been targeted. What makes them different? These devices could not only record visual information, but they could also influence what the subject saw. Moore could have made your wife see things that weren't there, or prevented her from seeing things that were. He was essentially developing technology for reality manipulation. The implications were chilling. Moore hadn't just been spying on their family. He had been preparing to psychologically manipulate Jeanette's perception of reality. The violation was even deeper than Chris had realized. But the knowledge also confirmed that Chris's decision to completely destroy Moore rather than simply stopping his surveillance activities had been correct. A man with such technology and such complete disregard for human dignity could never be allowed to operate freely again. That evening, Chris stood on the cabin's deck, looking out at the mountains and reflecting on the transformation his family had undergone. They had entered this ordeal as victims of a sophisticated surveillance conspiracy, but they had emerged stronger closer, and with a deep appreciation for their privacy and autonomy. Emma and Jake were playing video games inside, their laughter carrying through the open windows. Jeanette was reading beside the fireplace, her unbandaged eyes focusing perfectly on the pages. The normalcy of the scene was a testament to their victory over Moore's attempt to control and manipulate their lives. Christopher Buchanan had achieved something that few people ever experience: complete and total victory over an enemy who had threatened everything he held dear. Moore's empire was destroyed, his co-conspirators were facing justice, and his victims were healing from their trauma. Most importantly, the Buchanan family was safe, whole, and free to live their lives without the shadow of unwanted surveillance hanging over them. The war was over, and they had won decisively. Chapter 8. Justice Served. The federal courthouse in Denver had never seen a case quite like United States versus Frederick Moore. The proceedings had attracted national media attention, with reporters from major networks lining the courthouse steps as Chris and Jeanette arrived to give their victim impact statements. Inside the packed courtroom, Moore sat at the defendant's table looking like a broken man. His expensive suits had been replaced with orange prison garb, and his once commanding presence had been reduced to the nervous fidgeting of someone facing life imprisonment. The psychological warfare that Chris had waged against him had taken its toll. Moore's hair had gone completely gray, and he appeared to have aged decades in the months since his arrest. Your Honor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Amber McDonald began her presentation. The defendant orchestrated the most extensive domestic surveillance conspiracy in American history. Over 43 innocent civilians were subjected to illegal human experimentation, their most intimate moments recorded and sold to foreign intelligence agencies. Chris listened as the prosecutor detailed the full scope of Moore's crimes. The surveillance network had extended far beyond what anyone had initially suspected. Moore had been testing his technology on everyone from local politicians to federal judges, creating a web of blackmail and manipulation that had influenced dozens of important decisions over the past 2 years. When it was Chris's turn to speak, he stood and faced Moore directly, wanting the man to see the strength and determination of the family he had tried to destroy. Your Honor, Frederick Moore didn't just violate my family's privacy, Chris began, his voice carrying the authority he had learned during his military service. He turned my wife into an unwitting spy against her own children. He recorded our most intimate family moments and sold that information to anyone willing to pay for it. Chris detailed how Moore's surveillance had captured everything from family dinners to private conversations between parents and children. The psychological violation extended far beyond the physical implants. It had infected every memory of their family life with the knowledge that they had never truly been alone. But this case isn't just about my family, Chris continued. Moore's technology represented a fundamental threat to human autonomy and dignity. He was developing the capability to not just watch his victims, but to manipulate their perception of reality itself. If this conspiracy had continued, it could have fundamentally altered the nature of human consciousness and free will. Jeanette's testimony was even more powerful. She described the moment she learned that her own eyes had been turned against her family, and the months of recovery required to feel safe in her own home again. I keep thinking about all the times I looked at my children and didn't know that their images were being transmitted to strangers, Jeanette said, her voice steady but filled with controlled emotion. Every bedtime story, every homework session, every private moment between a mother and her children was being recorded and analyzed by people who saw us as nothing more than test subjects. The testimony of other victims filled 2 entire days. Government officials described how Moore's surveillance had influenced their decisions on defense contracts and policy initiatives. Corporate executives detailed how their business strategies had been compromised and sold to competitors. Families recounted the psychological trauma of learning that their most private moments had been commodified and distributed to criminal organizations. But perhaps the most damning testimony came from Moore's former associates, who had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for reduced sentences. They painted a picture of a man so consumed with power and control that he had lost all sense of moral boundaries. Moore used to say that privacy was just an outdated concept, testified Wayne's counterpart from Moore's organization, a former NSA analyst named Justin Medina. He believed that people would eventually accept total surveillance as the price of security. He saw himself as accelerating that inevitable future. The defense attempted to portray Moore as a patriotic businessman whose methods had been extreme, but whose goals had been legitimate national security objectives. But the evidence of his commercial exploitation of the surveillance data, combined with his willingness to sell American intelligence to foreign governments, made that argument impossible to sustain. Judge Terrence Mills had presided over federal courts for 23 years, but even he seemed shaken by the scope of Moore's crimes. "Mr. Moore," the judge said as he prepared to deliver the sentence, "you have violated the most fundamental privacy rights of American citizens in pursuit of personal profit and power. Your actions represent a betrayal not just of your victims, but of the constitutional principles that define our democracy." The sentence was comprehensive and devastating. Life imprisonment without possibility of parole on the surveillance conspiracy charges, plus consecutive sentences for human rights violations, racketeering, and treason. Moore would spend the rest of his life in the maximum security federal penitentiary in Colorado, with no possibility of ever regaining his freedom. But the sentence extended beyond Moore himself. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 15 to 30 years, and his corporate assets were liquidated to establish a victim compensation fund that would provide ongoing medical care and financial support for everyone who had been subjected to his surveillance technology. The international ramifications continued to unfold even after the sentencing. 3 foreign intelligence agencies were exposed as having purchased data from Moore's network, leading to diplomatic crises and the expulsion of dozens of intelligence operatives from the United States. The technology Moore had developed was classified and secured by U.S. military intelligence, ensuring that it could never again be used for illegal surveillance purposes. As Chris and Jeanette left the courthouse, they were approached by Dr. Ted Ramsey, the optometrist whose courage in reporting the surveillance devices had made the entire investigation possible. "I wanted to thank you for seeing this through," Dr. Ramsey said, shaking Chris's hand. "When I first saw those devices in your wife's eyes, I wasn't sure anyone would believe me or take action. You saved our family and dozens of other families," Chris replied. "Your decision to speak up instead of staying silent took real courage." Dr. Ramsey smiled, but his expression remained serious. "I keep thinking about how many other victims there might be out there, people who were subjected to Moore's experiments but haven't been identified yet. This case has shown us that the technology exists and that there are people willing to use it." Chris nodded, understanding the broader implications of what they had uncovered. Moore's conspiracy had been stopped, but the technology and the temptation to abuse it would continue to exist. Vigilance would be required to prevent future violations of human privacy and dignity. That evening, Chris and Jeanette returned to their original home for the first time in months. The house felt both familiar and strange. They knew intellectually that it was safe, but would take time for them to fully trust their privacy again. Emma and Jake were excited to return to their regular school and resume their normal activities. The children had adapted remarkably well to their extended adventure, but Chris could see their relief at returning to predictable routines and familiar surroundings. "Dad," Emma said as the family sat down for their first dinner in their original dining room, "are you proud of what you did to that bad man?" Chris considered the question carefully. "I'm proud that we protected our family and stopped him from hurting other families. I'm proud that justice was served and that his victims received compensation for what they suffered." "But," Emma pressed, reading the complexity in her father's tone. "But I also hope that we never have to go through something like this again," Chris replied. Fighting back was necessary, but it required us to become harder and more suspicious than I would have preferred. I hope you and Jake can grow up in a world where such vigilance isn't necessary." Jake, ever practical, asked, "Are there other bad guys out there like Mr. Moore?" Chris exchanged a look with Jeanette, both of them understanding that their children deserved an honest answer. "There probably are," Chris said, "but now there are also people watching for them, and laws that make it harder for them to hurt innocent families. The most important thing is that we stay together and look out for each other." As the family settled into their restored normal life, Chris reflected on the completeness of their victory over Frederick Moore. The man who had violated their privacy was spending the rest of his life in prison. His co-conspirators were facing similar fates. His victims were receiving justice and compensation. And most importantly, his surveillance technology had been secured and could never again be used against innocent people. Christopher Buchanan had proven that even the most sophisticated and well-connected enemies could be defeated by someone with the right combination of skills, determination, and moral clarity. The war was over, justice had been served, and the Buchanan family was finally, truly safe. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 6 months after Frederick Moore's sentencing, Chris stood in the backyard of their Denver home, watching Emma and Jake play with their friends in what had become a regular Saturday afternoon gathering. The children's laughter echoed across the neighborhood, a sound that represented everything Moore's surveillance conspiracy had threatened to steal from their family. Jeanette emerged from the house carrying a tray of drinks for their guests, Dr. Ted Ramsey and his family, Jordan Eastman with his wife and children, and several other families who had been victimized by Moore's surveillance network. What had begun as a support group for recovering victims had evolved into genuine friendships forged through shared trauma and mutual assistance. "Hard to believe it's been a year since this all started," Dr. Ramsey commented, settling into one of the patio chairs Chris had arranged for their gathering. Chris nodded, reflecting on how much their lives had changed since that fateful day in the optometrist's office. "Sometimes it feels like it happened to different people. The family that walked into your clinic that day was naive about the threats that exist in our technological world. The past months had brought unexpected opportunities along with healing." Chris's expertise in counter-surveillance and his role in exposing Moore's conspiracy had attracted attention from government agencies and private security firms. He had been consulted on several high-profile cases involving illegal surveillance, and his security consulting business had grown exponentially. But more importantly, Chris had discovered a calling that extended beyond personal protection. He was working with congressional committees to draft legislation that would prevent future surveillance abuses, and he had established a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of illegal technological experimentation. The Buchanan Foundation has already helped 37 families, Jeanette said, settling beside her husband with a satisfaction that came from turning their trauma into a force for protecting others. "We've got enough funding to provide legal assistance and medical care for surveillance victims for the next 5 years. The Foundation's work had revealed the true scope of technological privacy violations in American society. Moore's conspiracy had been exceptional in its sophistication and scale, but similar abuses were occurring across the country as surveillance technology advanced faster than the legal frameworks designed to control it. Jordan Eastman, who had become the Foundation's head of security, provided regular updates on their expanding mission. "We've identified 12 other companies that were potentially using similar surveillance technologies," he reported. "None as advanced as Moore's operation, but still concerning enough to warrant investigation." The work was challenging, but deeply fulfilling. Chris had found that his military intelligence background and his experience defeating Moore's conspiracy made him uniquely qualified to identify and counter surveillance threats that law enforcement agencies struggled to understand. Emma's Science Fair project won second place, Jeanette announced, drawing Chris's attention back to their family's current achievements. She did a presentation on privacy rights and surveillance technology. Her teacher said it was the most sophisticated analysis she'd ever seen from a middle school student. Chris smiled, remembering Emma's determination to understand what had happened to their family. Both children had been affected by their experience, but in ways that seemed to strengthen rather than traumatize them. Emma had developed an interest in technology and civil liberties, while Jake had become fascinated with security systems and protective measures. "What about the book project?" Dr. Ramsey asked, referring to the memoir Chris had been writing about their experience with Moore's surveillance conspiracy. "Publisher says it'll be out next spring," Chris replied. "We're hoping it'll help people understand the threats that exist and the importance of maintaining privacy rights in a technological society." The book had been therapeutic to write, allowing Chris to process the full scope of what their family had endured and accomplished. but it also served a larger purpose, educating the public about surveillance threats and providing a blueprint for fighting back against technological abuse. The legal aftermath of Moore's case continued to generate headlines. 3 more co-conspirators had been sentenced in the past month, and congressional hearings were still ongoing. The case had become a watershed moment in privacy law, establishing precedents that would protect future victims of surveillance technology. "Any word on Moore himself?" Jordan asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't. Chris's expression hardened slightly. "He's in solitary confinement at ADX Florence. Attempted to organize a smuggling operation from prison, trying to get surveillance devices to other inmates. Even behind bars, he can't stop trying to violate people's privacy." The news of Moore's continued criminal activities had reinforced Chris's conviction that destroying the man completely had been the correct decision. Moore was a predator who would never voluntarily stop victimizing others, and only permanent incarceration could protect society from his schemes. But Chris had also learned to separate his satisfaction with Moore's punishment from his family's healing process. The children rarely asked about Moore anymore, and Jeanette had stopped having nightmares about being watched. Their lives had moved beyond the trauma of surveillance and into a future defined by their own choices rather than Moore's violations. "Dad," Emma called from the yard, "can you help us with the security system for our treehouse?" Chris laughed, recognizing the irony of his daughter's request. The girl who had been victimized by surveillance technology was now enthusiastically embracing protective technology as a tool for maintaining her own privacy and security. "Sure thing, kiddo," Chris replied, standing to join the children in their project. As he walked across the yard, Chris reflected on the completeness of their family's transformation. They had entered the conflict with Moore's victims, but they had emerged as protectors, not just of themselves, but of other families facing similar threats. The children's treehouse had become a symbol of their recovered sense of security and privacy. It was their space, protected by systems they understood and controlled, where they could be children without fear of unwanted observation or interference. Later that evening, after their guests had departed and the children were asleep, Chris and Jeanette sat on their back porch, enjoying the quiet comfort of their restored privacy. "Do you ever regret how we handled the Moore situation?" Jeanette asked, a question that had occasionally surfaced during their recovery process. Chris considered his response carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that our children had to experience that kind of threat and upheaval. But I don't regret our decision to fight back completely and decisively." "Even the illegal parts?" Jeanette pressed gently. Chris nodded without hesitation. "Especially the illegal parts. Moore was operating outside the law, and conventional legal remedies would have taken years to implement while he continued victimizing other families. Sometimes justice requires people to act outside normal channels." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the normal sounds of their neighborhood: traffic, distant conversations, dogs barking. These were the sounds of a free society, where people could move and speak and live without fear of comprehensive surveillance. "The foundation received another donation today," Jeanette mentioned. "Anonymous, but substantial. Someone out there understands what we're trying to accomplish." Chris suspected the donation had come from one of the government agencies that had benefited from his expertise in dismantling Moore's network, but he didn't pursue the question. The important thing was that their work would continue, protecting other families from the kind of technological abuse they had experienced. As they prepared for bed, Chris checked the discrete security systems he had installed throughout their home. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were using surveillance technology to protect themselves from surveillance technology. But the crucial difference was consent and control. These were their systems, operated according to their values, protecting their privacy rather than violating it. "I love you, soldier," Jeanette said as they settled into bed, using the affectionate term she had adopted during their conflict with Moore. "I love you too," Chris replied, holding his wife close and marveling at how completely they had reclaimed their sense of security and intimacy. Outside their bedroom window, the city of Denver stretched into the distance, Millions of people living their lives with the assumption that their privacy was protected by law and social convention. Thanks to the exposure of Moore's conspiracy and the legal precedents established by his prosecution, that assumption was now more secure than it had been in decades. Christopher Buchanan had begun this journey as a victim of surveillance technology, but he had ended it as a guardian of privacy rights for his family and his community. The war against Frederick Moore was over. Justice had been served, and the future held the promise of continued vigilance in defense of human dignity and autonomy. The Buchanan family was safe, whole, and free to live their lives on their own terms. In a world of increasing technological complexity, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Family. Dale Matthews stood in his mahogany-paneled study, examining the quarterly reports spread across his antique oak desk. At 42, he had built Matthews Security Consulting from nothing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise specializing in corporate protection and private investigation. His steel-gray eyes, which had intimidated countless boardroom adversaries, now focused on the numbers that confirmed another record-breaking quarter. The sound of laughter drifted up from the garden below. Through the tall windows, he watched his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, chase butterflies across the manicured lawn of their sprawling estate in Connecticut's Gold Coast. Her golden curls bounced as she ran, reminding him of his wife, Angela, when they'd first met 15 years ago. Angela Matthews, formerly Angela Cahill, had been the ambitious young nurse who caught his eye during his recovery from military injury. She was 25 then, beautiful and seemingly devoted. Now 37, she maintained her striking appearance through expensive treatments and designer clothes that Dale's success afforded her. Yet lately, something had shifted in their marriage, a distance he couldn't quite place. Dale's younger brother-in-law, Shane Dennis, had joined their family circle 3 years ago when he'd completed his surgical residency. At 34, Shane was everything Dale wasn't. Charming where Dale was intense, sociable where Dale was reserved, and recently divorced after his wife left him for emotional unavailability. Angela had insisted they help Shane get established, even arranging for him to rent the guest house on their property. The irony wasn't lost on Dale that Shane, who specialized in pediatric surgery, had become Emma's favorite uncle. The little girl adored him, often spending hours in his company when he wasn't at the hospital. Dale had encouraged this relationship, believing Emma needed positive male influences beyond her often absent father. But tonight felt different. Dale had returned early from a business trip to Montreal, arriving home to find the house unusually quiet. Angela had claimed she was visiting her sister Cheryl, but Cheryl had called looking for her just an hour ago. Shane's car wasn't in the guest house driveway, though Dale had seen it parked behind the stables, an odd place to leave it. Dale's military training and investigative instincts, honed by years of exposing corporate espionage and infidelity, had taught him to trust his gut, and his gut was screaming that something was wrong. He moved to his desk drawer and retrieved a small digital recorder, one of many surveillance devices his company manufactured. As footsteps echoed in the hallway outside his study, Dale quickly activated the device and slipped it behind a stack of books. The door opened without a knock. Angela entered, her hair slightly disheveled, wearing the same dress she'd had on that morning, but with the top button undone. Behind her, Shane appeared, adjusting his shirt collar. "Dale," Angela's voice pitched higher than usual. "I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow." "Change of plans," Dale replied evenly, studying both their faces. "Where have you two been?" "I was showing Shane the new irrigation system for the back gardens," Angela said quickly. "He's thinking of having similar work done at his place." Shane nodded, but Dale noticed a slight tremor in his hands, the same tell Dale had observed in lying witnesses during depositions. "The system is impressive, Dale. Very thorough. Indeed, Dale's tone remained neutral, but his mind was cataloging every inconsistency. The back gardens were visible from his study window, and he'd been here for 2 hours without seeing anyone. Angela's dress showed grass stains that weren't there at breakfast. Shane's hair had leaves in it. "Where's Emma?" Dale asked. "Sleeping over at the Jennings house," Angela replied. "Matthew called this afternoon asking if she could stay. I said yes since you weren't expected back." Dale nodded slowly. The Jennings were their neighbors, and their daughter was Emma's closest friend. It was a reasonable explanation, yet something about Angela's delivery felt rehearsed. "Well," Shane said, backing toward the door, "I should let you two catch up. Thanks for the tour, Angela." After Shane left, Angela moved to Dale's side, placing her hand on his shoulder. Her touch, once electric, now felt calculating. "How was Montreal?" "Productive." Dale turned to face her fully. "The Du Bois merger went through. We'll be expanding into European markets." "That's wonderful, honey." But her smile didn't reach her eyes, and Dale noticed she was scanning his desk, her gaze lingering on the stack of books where he'd hidden the recorder. "Angela," Dale said softly, "is there anything you need to tell me?" For a moment, her mask slipped, and he saw something like fear flicker across her features. But it was gone so quickly, he almost questioned whether he'd seen it at all. "What would I need to tell you?" she asked, her voice steady again. "Nothing, I suppose." Dale pulled her closer, studying her face. "I'm just tired. It's been a long day." That night, as Angela slept beside him, Dale stared at the ceiling and replayed every interaction, every micro-expression, every inconsistency. His phone buzzed with a text from his head of security, Corey Crane. "Package delivered to your office as requested. Content secure." Dale had asked Corey to install additional security cameras around the property while he was away, a precaution he'd been meaning to take for months. Now he was grateful for his paranoia. Tomorrow, he would review the footage. Tonight, he would plan. In his 20 years of investigating betrayals, Dale had learned that the most devastating discoveries often came not from grand gestures of deception, but from small, seemingly innocent lies that unraveled to reveal much darker truths. As he drifted off to sleep, Dale's last conscious thought was a promise to himself. If his suspicions proved correct, he would show no mercy. He had spent his life protecting others from betrayal. If his own family had betrayed him, they would learn why Dale Matthews had never lost a case, and why his enemies never forgot his name. Chapter 2. What Emma Saw. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Dale sat at the breakfast table, reading the Wall Street Journal, while Angela prepared his coffee exactly as she had for 15 years, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. Emma's empty chair served as a reminder of her absence, the house feeling hollow without her chatter. "I'll pick up Emma around noon," Angela said, not looking at him. "The Jennings are taking the girls to that new indoor playground in Stanford." "I'll come with you," Dale replied casually. "I want to talk to Matthew about the security contract for his firm." Angela's hand trembled slightly as she set down his cup. "Oh, that's not necessary. I'm sure you have work to catch up on. Nothing that can't wait." Dale's tone brooked no argument. Family comes first. After Angela left for her morning yoga class, Dale retreated to his study and powered up the laptop connected to his new security system. The high-definition cameras Corey had installed provided crystal-clear footage of every angle of the property. He started with yesterday afternoon, fast-forwarding through hours of empty lawn and garden views until movement caught his attention. At 2:47 p.m., Angela's Mercedes pulled into the driveway. But instead of coming to the main house, she drove directly to the guest house where Shane was waiting outside. Dale slowed the playback to normal speed. Angela and Shane embraced immediately, not the casual hug of in-laws, but the desperate clutch of lovers reuniting. Shane's hands roamed her body as he pushed her against the car, their mouths locked together with urgent hunger. Dale's jaw tightened, but he continued watching with the detached professionalism that had made him successful. Evidence required complete documentation. They moved inside Shane's residence, disappearing from the exterior camera's view. But Dale had anticipated this. His installation included interior cameras in the guest house, positioned as security measures that Shane had agreed to months ago. What he saw next confirmed his worst fears. Angela and Shane's affair wasn't new. Their practiced intimacy spoke of months, possibly years of deception. But more disturbing were the fragments of conversation the microphones picked up. Dale suspects something. Angela panted between kisses. How can you tell? Shane's voice was muffled against her neck. He's watching us differently, more carefully. Angela pulled back, her face serious. And Emma. What about Emma? Last night, before the sleepover, she asked me why you and I were playing wrestling in Uncle Dale's study. She said she saw us through the window when she came back from feeding the horses. Shane went pale. What did you tell her? That she must have been mistaken. But Dale. Angela's voice dropped to a whisper. If Emma tells him what she thinks she saw. She's 7 years old, Shane said. Kids imagine things all the time. This is Emma we're talking about. She's sharp, just like her father. And if Dale starts asking questions. Dale paused the recording, his blood running cold. Emma had witnessed their affair in his own study, the sacred space where he conducted his most sensitive business, where he'd built his empire. The violation felt like acid in his veins. But worse was the implication of their conversation. They weren't just worried about being discovered. They were discussing Emma as a potential problem to be solved. Dale fast-forwarded through more footage, looking for any other relevant interactions. At 4:23 p.m., he found it. Emma had returned home earlier than expected, running through the front door, calling for her mother. She'd searched the house before heading to the window of Dale's study, where she'd stood for several minutes watching something that made her small face scrunch in confusion. The timestamp showed this was exactly when Angela and Shane were inside the guest house. Whatever Emma had seen the night before in the study, it had been significant enough for her to look for more evidence. Dale's phone rang, interrupting his investigation. Mr. Matthews. The voice belonged to Janet Morrison, his secretary. There's a Dr. Harrison on line 1. Says it's urgent regarding your daughter. Dale's stomach dropped. Put him through. Mr. Matthews? This is Dr. Harrison from Greenwich Hospital. I need you to come in immediately. There's been an incident with Emma. What kind of incident? Dale's voice remained steady despite the ice forming in his chest. She was brought in by your brother-in-law, Dr. Dennis. She collapsed at the Jennings house. Dr. Dennis is recommending immediate surgery. It appears to be severe tonsillitis that could lead to complications if not addressed urgently. Dale was already grabbing his keys. I'm on my way. The drive to Greenwich Hospital took 12 minutes. A trip Dale made in 8, his mind racing through possibilities. Emma had been perfectly healthy yesterday. The timing felt wrong, too convenient, especially given what he'd discovered about Angela and Shane's concerns. He found Angela in the surgery waiting room, her face tear-streaked and hands trembling. Dale, thank God you're here. Shane says her tonsils are severely infected. She could die if he doesn't operate immediately. Where is Shane now? In surgery prep. He's the best pediatric surgeon in the state. Emma's in good hands. Dale studied his wife's performance, noting the slight overacting, the way she avoided direct eye contact. When did Emma start showing symptoms? This morning, after I picked her up. She complained of a sore throat in the car, then started running a fever at the Jennings. By the time we got here, she was barely conscious. Before Dale could respond, Shane emerged from the surgical wing, still in scrubs but without the cap and mask. His expression was grave. Dale, I need to speak with you both. Shane's voice carried the weight of devastating news. We did everything we could, but the infection had spread too far. I'm so sorry we lost her. The words hit Dale like physical blows. Angela's scream of anguish echoed through the hallway as she collapsed into Shane's arms. Other families in the waiting room stared in sympathy at the grieving parents. But something in Shane's eyes, a flicker of satisfaction quickly masked by professional sorrow, triggered every instinct Dale had developed over years of reading people. This wasn't the face of a devastated uncle who'd lost his beloved niece. This was the face of a man who'd just solved a problem. As Angela sobbed against Shane's chest, Dale stepped back, his mind shifting into tactical mode. If this was performance, it was elaborate and risky. But if Emma had truly seen something that threatened Angela and Shane's secret, I need to see her, Dale said quietly. Dale, no, Angela whispered. You shouldn't remember her that way. I need to see my daughter. Shane nodded reluctantly. Of course. But please prepare yourself. They led him to a small viewing room where Emma's body lay covered by a white sheet. Dale approached slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. When Shane pulled back the sheet, Dale saw his daughter's peaceful face, pale but unmarked by any signs of struggle or distress. What exactly happened during surgery? Dale asked, his voice clinically detached. Shane launched into a detailed medical explanation about complications, bleeding, and cardiac arrest. But Dale was studying the body with the same analytical precision he'd used to examine crime scenes during his military service. Emma's skin tone, the positioning of her hands, the absence of any medical equipment or monitoring devices. Everything suggested she'd been lying here for hours, not minutes. I'll need to make arrangements, Dale said finally. Of course, Shane replied. I'll handle all the paperwork. Family privilege. As they left the hospital, Dale's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made his blood freeze. Your daughter is safe. Meet me at the old warehouse on Harbor Road at midnight. Come alone, or she dies for real. A friend. Dale glanced at Angela and Shane, both still maintaining their grief-stricken performances. Neither seemed to have noticed his phone. For the first time since entering the hospital, Dale allowed himself to hope. But if Emma was alive, that meant the elaborate deception was even more sinister than he'd imagined. And if someone else was involved, someone with access to both Emma and inside knowledge of the plan, then the conspiracy ran deeper than just an affair. That night, as Angela sedated herself with grief and wine, Dale prepared for the most important meeting of his life. In his jacket pocket, he carried his Glock 19 and a small recording device. Whatever game Angela and Shane were playing, the rules were about to change. Chapter 3. The Revelation. The Harbor Road warehouse district at midnight was a graveyard of rusted metal and broken dreams. Dale parked his BMW in the shadow of an abandoned textile factory, his military training automatically cataloging escape routes and potential threats. The anonymous text had led him here with the impossible promise that Emma was alive, a hope that warred with his investigative instincts screaming that this was likely a trap. He moved through the darkness toward the specified warehouse, his Glock drawn but held low. The building loomed against the star-scattered sky, its broken windows like dead eyes watching his approach. A single light glowed from within, casting long shadows through the industrial skeleton. Mr. Matthews. The voice came from behind a stack of shipping containers. A figure emerged, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the efficient bearing of a medical professional. I'm Dr. Grace Weaver. I used to work with your brother-in-law. Where is my daughter? Dale's voice cut through the night air like a blade. Safe. But first, you need to understand what you've stumbled into. Grace stepped into the light, revealing tired eyes and the trembling hands of someone carrying enormous guilt. Shane Dennis isn't just having an affair with your wife. They've been planning something far worse. Explain. Now, Grace pulled out a tablet, its screen casting blue light between them. 3 months ago, Shane approached me with a proposal. He needed someone with access to the hospital morgue and crematorium, someone who could provide death certificates and handle difficult cases discreetly. Dale's finger tightened on his weapon's grip. What kind of cases? People who needed to disappear. Shane has been running a very specialized operation. Fake death for clients willing to pay enormous sums to escape their lives. Witness protection for criminals, husbands dodging alimony, executives fleeing fraud charges. The profit margins are astronomical when you can guarantee someone a completely clean slate. The pieces began forming a horrifying picture in Dale's mind. And Emma, your daughter witnessed Shane and Angela in your study 3 nights ago. But she saw more than just an affair. Grace swiped to security footage on her tablet. She saw Shane photographing documents from your safe. Corporate secrets, client files, military contracts. Information worth millions to the right buyers. The footage showed Emma standing in the doorway of Dale's study, watching as Shane used his phone to photograph papers spread across the desk while Angela served as lookout. The little girl had witnessed industrial espionage, not just adultery. Emma's too smart, Grace continued. Shane realized she would eventually tell you what she saw. So they arranged for her to die during routine surgery, then planned to sell her to one of Shane's international clients, people who pay premium prices for untraceable children. Dale's vision went red at the edges. You're telling me they planned to fake my daughter's death and traffic her? Shane has done this before, but always with adults who consented to disappear. Children are a new venture for him, more profitable and more permanent. Your wife provided the family access he needed. Where is Emma? Grace gestured toward the warehouse. Inside. But there's more you need to know. Shane isn't working alone. He has a partner, someone with connections to organized crime, families, and international trafficking networks. Someone with the resources to make people vanish permanently. They moved toward the warehouse entrance, Grace's keycard unlocking multiple security doors. I've been documenting Shane's operation for months, trying to find a way to expose him without destroying my own career. But when I learned they were targeting a child, the warehouse interior was divided into several sections. A medical facility complete with surgical equipment, a forge for creating false documents, and in the back, a series of small rooms that looked disturbingly like cells. The holding area, Grace explained grimly, where deceased clients wait for their new identities and transportation. In the last room, Dale found Emma sleeping on a small bed, breathing peacefully. She looked exactly as she had that morning, healthy, unharmed, and very much alive. The relief nearly drove him to his knees. Daddy, Emma's eyes fluttered open as he knelt beside her. I had the strangest dream. Uncle Shane gave me medicine and told me I was going on a special trip. Dale gathered his daughter into his arms, feeling her warm breath against his neck. It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here now. Is Mommy coming too? Emma asked innocently. The question hit Dale like a physical blow. His daughter still trusted the woman who'd sold her to child traffickers. We'll talk about Mommy later, baby. Grace appeared in the doorway. Dale, we need to move quickly. Shane expects me to transfer Emma to his partner's facility tonight. When I don't show up, who is Shane's partner? Gustavo Guerra. He runs a legitimate import-export business as cover, but his real operation moves people and information across borders. Shane has been feeding him corporate intelligence for months. Your company's client list, security protocols, everything. Dale's mind shifted into tactical mode. How many people know about tonight's operation? Just Shane, Angela, and Guerra's transportation team. They're expecting Emma to be delivered to a warehouse in Bridgeport at 2 a.m. Dale checked his watch, 12:47 a.m. He had just over an hour to turn the hunters into the hunted. Grace, I need you to make that delivery. What? Not Emma. But Shane and Angela need to believe everything went according to plan. Dale's voice carried the cold precision that had made him successful in corporate warfare. I have an idea that will give us everything we need to destroy them. As they prepared to leave, Emma tugged on Dale's jacket. Daddy, are you mad at Uncle Shane and Mommy? Dale knelt to her level, looking into eyes that reflected his own intelligence and determination. Why would you ask that, sweetheart? Because of what I saw in your study. They were taking pictures of your secret papers and saying bad words about you. Pride and fury warred in Dale's chest. His 7-year-old daughter had recognized corporate espionage when she saw it. What kind of bad words? Mommy said you were stupid and that Uncle Shane was going to make lots of money from your files. She said after they got the money, they could go away together and I could live with Grandma Cheryl. The casual way Emma delivered this information, as if discussing a change in weekend plans rather than a family's destruction, revealed how little Angela had tried to hide her contempt from their daughter. Dale stood, his decision crystallizing. Angela and Shane had betrayed him, stolen from him, planned to traffic his child, and poisoned his daughter's innocence with their schemes. There would be no forgiveness, no mercy, no escape. Grace, he said quietly, I want you to make a phone call. Tell Shane there's been a complication, that Emma woke up during transport and had to be sedated again. By me, 3 hours. What are you planning? Dale's smile was arctic. Justice. The kind that doesn't require courts or juries. As they drove away from the warehouse with Emma sleeping safely in the back seat, Dale began planning the most important operation of his life. Shane and Angela thought they were predators who'd successfully eliminated a threat. They were about to learn they'd awakened something far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. Chapter 4. The Architect's Design. Dale returned home at 3 a.m. to find Angela passed out on their bed, an empty wine bottle on the nightstand beside a half-empty bottle of prescription anxiety medication. She lay sprawled across the sheets, still wearing the black dress she'd chosen for their daughter's death, makeup smeared from hours of performed grief. He stood in the doorway studying the woman he'd loved for 15 years, searching for any trace of the devoted wife and mother she'd pretended to be. But all he saw now was an actress who'd given an award-worthy performance while selling their child to human traffickers. Emma was safely hidden at Corey Crane's secure facility, a converted estate that served as Dale's emergency operations center. Grace Weaver had made the call to Shane, reporting complications that would delay Emma's delivery by 12 hours. That gave Dale time to orchestrate something far more permanent than a simple rescue. In his study, Dale activated the secure communication system that connected him to his most trusted operatives. Matthews Security Consulting employed former military and intelligence personnel who specialized in situations where conventional law enforcement couldn't, or wouldn't, intervene. Corey, Dale spoke into the encrypted phone. I need a full tactical team prepared for Operation Reckoning. Authorization level black. Copy that, boss. Resources unlimited. Timeline 18 hours for deployment, 6 hours for execution. Done. And Corey? This one's personal. Understood, sir. Dale spent the next hour reviewing personnel files, selecting operators who'd proven their loyalty through years of dangerous assignments. Marcus Moody, his demolitions expert and former Navy SEAL. Eugene Frank, whose computer skills could penetrate any security system. Luke Darling, a psychological warfare specialist who could break anyone's mind without laying a finger on them. But this wasn't just about assembling a team. Shane and Angela's betrayal had revealed a cancer that needed to be completely excised. Guerra's human trafficking network, the corruption at Greenwich Hospital, the corporate espionage ring, all of it would burn. At 6 a.m., Angela stumbled into the kitchen wearing yesterday's clothes and yesterday's grief. She'd perfected the look of a devastated mother, complete with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. I can't believe she's gone, Angela whispered, pouring coffee with shaking fingers. Our little girl. Dale watched her performance with clinical detachment. The funeral arrangements need to be made. Shane offered to handle everything. He feels responsible, thinks he should have caught the infection earlier. How considerate of him. Angela looked up sharply, perhaps detecting something in his tone. Dale, are you angry with Shane? Because this wasn't his fault. The infection was too advanced. I'm not angry, Dale replied truthfully. Anger was a hot emotion, consuming and temporary. What he felt now was cold, calculating, and permanent. I'm grateful Shane tried so hard to save her. Relief flickered across Angela's features. He's devastated. I think he needs our support right now. Absolutely. Why don't you invite him for dinner tonight? We should discuss Emma's memorial service. Angela nodded eagerly, probably looking forward to more time with her lover while maintaining their cover story. That's a wonderful idea. Shane could use the comfort. After Angela left for another grief counseling session with her sister, Dale drove to his company's headquarters in Stanford. The 40-story glass tower housed one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations on the East Coast, disguised as a legitimate security consulting firm. In his executive conference room, Dale assembled his core team. Maps, photographs, and surveillance reports covered every surface. Electronic equipment hummed, with intercepted communications and real-time tracking data. Gentlemen, Dale began, we're dealing with a criminal conspiracy that includes human trafficking, corporate espionage, and attempted murder. The subjects are Shane Dennis, Angela Matthews, and Gustavo Guerra, along with an unknown number of associates. Marcus Moody studied the tactical photographs. What's the objective, boss? Complete elimination of the network. No arrests, no trials, no witnesses. Dale's voice carried the authority of a man who'd made life-and-death decisions in combat zones. Shane Dennis and Angela Matthews have forfeited their right to exist. Guerra's operation needs to disappear permanently. Eugene Frank looked up from his laptop. I've penetrated Guerra's communications network. His next shipment of merchandise moves through Port Newark tomorrow night. 12 people scheduled for transport to various international destinations. We'll intercept, Dale decided. Those people get genuine protection while we acquire intelligence on Guerra's entire operation. Luke Darling spread psychological profiles across the table. Dennis and your wife are amateurs playing in a professional game. Their terror when things start falling apart will provide significant leverage. The timeline, Dale continued, begins tonight. Angela and Shane expect to celebrate Emma's successful death while planning their escape with Guerra's blood money. Instead, they're walking into a trap that will consume them slowly and completely. Corey presented the technical specifications. Full surveillance package is deployed around their meeting locations. Every word, every move, recorded and documented. When this is over, we'll have enough evidence to bury anyone who tries to investigate their disappearances. Dale studied the faces of men who'd followed him through corporate wars and gray zone operations. Questions. Rules of engagement. Marcus asked. There are no rules. Shane Dennis planned to sell my 7-year-old daughter to child traffickers. Angela Matthews is his willing accomplice. They've destroyed the sanctity of my family and my home. Dale's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I want them to understand exactly what they've unleashed before they die. The team dispersed to their preparations, leaving Dale alone with his thoughts. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the Connecticut coast stretching toward Long Island Sound. This was the empire he'd built through discipline, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Shane and Angela had violated the most fundamental rule of warfare. Never threaten what a dangerous man loves most. His phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Shane will come for dinner at 7. He's bringing wine to celebrate Emma's memory. Dale typed back. Perfect. I'll prepare something special. As the sun set over his corporate kingdom, Dale Matthews began the final preparations for a war that would end with total victory or total destruction. But given his track record, there was really only one possible outcome. Shane and Angela had started this game thinking they were predators. They were about to discover they were prey. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. At exactly 7 p.m., Shane Dennis knocked on the front door of the Matthews estate, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and wearing the solemn expression of a grieving uncle. Dale watched through the security monitors as Angela let him in, their embrace lasting several seconds longer than appropriate for in-laws mourning a child. Dale, Shane said, entering the dining room with manufactured sadness. I can't tell you how sorry I am about Emma. She was such a special little girl. She was everything to me, Dale replied, pouring wine into crystal glasses that had been wedding gifts 15 years ago. Please sit. Angela prepared Emma's favorite meal, a sort of memorial dinner. As they ate, Shane regaled them with stories of Emma's visits to the hospital, how the staff had adored her, how she talked about becoming a doctor like Uncle Shane. Angela dabbed at her eyes periodically, playing the devastated mother to perfection. But Dale was watching for micro-expressions, vocal stress patterns, and body language tells that revealed their true emotions. Shane kept checking his phone, while Angela's appetite seemed remarkably robust for a woman who'd lost her child 18 hours ago. I've been thinking about the funeral arrangements, Dale said during a lull in conversation. Something grand. Emma deserves the best. Actually, Shane interjected carefully, I was hoping we could discuss something delicate. The hospital administration is concerned about potential liability issues. They're recommending immediate cremation and a private service. Liability issues, medical malpractice lawsuits, media attention. These things can get messy when a child dies during routine surgery. Shane's performance was smooth, practiced. I think Emma would want us to remember her privately, without all the circus of a public funeral. Dale nodded thoughtfully. You're probably right. Keep it simple, keep it family. Relief flickered across both their faces. A cremation would eliminate any possibility of an autopsy that could reveal Emma was never actually dead. They thought they just sealed their victory. There's one thing troubling me, Dale continued conversationally. Emma mentioned seeing something strange the other night. She said she watched you and Angela through the study window, taking pictures of papers from my desk. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Angela's wine glass trembled in her hand, while Shane's face went pale. Children have such vivid imaginations, Angela said quickly. She probably saw us talking and thought. She was very specific. Dale interrupted gently. Said you were photographing documents while discussing how much money you could make from my files. Shane set down his fork with mechanical precision. Dale, I think grief might be affecting your judgment. Why would we? She also mentioned you calling me stupid and planning to go away together while she lived with Grandma Cheryl. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Angela and Shane exchanged glances that confirmed everything Dale needed to know. Where is this coming from? Angela demanded, her mask beginning to slip. Our daughter just died, and you're inventing conspiracy theories? Inventing. Dale reached into his jacket and placed a small digital recorder on the table. This device was in my study for the past week. Would you like to hear what it captured? Shane lunged for the recorder, but Dale was faster, snatching it back and pressing play. Angela's voice filled the room. Dale's so trusting, he'll never suspect anything. By the time he discovers the missing files, we'll be halfway to Switzerland with Gera's payment. That's not. Angela started, then stopped as her own words continued playing. Shane's voice joined hers. The little brat saw too much. We need to handle the Emma problem before she talks. Dale stopped the recording, studying their faces as the reality of their exposure sank in. The Emma problem? You call my daughter a problem that needed to be handled? Dale, please, let us explain, Shane began. No explanation necessary. I understand perfectly. Dale's voice remained calm, conversational. You've been stealing corporate secrets, selling them to human traffickers, and planning to fake Emma's death so you could disappear with the profits. Angela jumped up from her chair. You don't understand the whole situation. I understand that you sold our daughter to child traffickers. The accusation hung in the air like a death sentence. Shane's face went white, while Angela staggered backward. That's not. We would never. Shane's composure finally cracked. Really? Then why did Dr. Weaver expect to deliver Emma to Gera's facility tonight? The mention of Grace's name hit them like physical blows. Shane sank into his chair, realizing the scope of Dale's knowledge. How long have you known? Angela whispered. Long enough to save my daughter and document your entire operation. Dale stood, moving to the window that overlooked the grounds. Emma is safe, by the way, very much alive and very well cared for. Where is she? Angela demanded. Somewhere you'll never find her. Dale turned back to face them. The question now is what to do with the two people who tried to traffic my child. Shane attempted to regain control. Dale, we can work this out. The whole thing got out of hand, but we never intended. You never intended to get caught. Look, the money from Gera, we can split it. Make you a partner. We have contacts who would pay millions for your client files. Dale smiled for the first time that evening. You think this is about money? Everything's about money. Angela snapped, her true nature finally emerging. Your precious company, this house, your reputation, all of it's just money and ego. At least Shane and I are honest about what we want. And what do you want? Freedom from your suffocating control, your obsessive need to dominate everything around you. Shane offers me excitement, passion, a real life instead of being a trophy wife in your corporate museum. Dale absorbed her words without flinching. So you decided to steal my business secrets and sell my daughter to human traffickers. Emma would have been fine. Angela shouted. Gera has clients who've been waiting years for a child like her. She would have had everything, money, education, opportunities you could never provide. Opportunities as a trafficked child? as an adopted daughter to people who truly want her, not someone who sees her as an extension of his own ego. Dale nodded slowly. I see. You genuinely believe you were doing Emma a favor. We were saving her from becoming like you, cold, calculating, incapable of real emotion. Interesting perspective. Dale checked his watch. 8:47 p.m. Unfortunately, your business partners are expecting delivery of the merchandise in about an hour. Shane's phone buzzed with a text. His face went ashen as he read it. Problem? Dale asked. Guerra's people are asking for confirmation of the delivery schedule. Then you better confirm it. Dale's tone turned deadly serious. Both of you are going to that warehouse. You're going to explain to Guerra exactly how you lost his merchandise. And you're going to face the consequences of disappointing a man who kills people for far smaller mistakes. Dale, please, Shane begged. We can fix this. We can make this right. The only thing that can be made right now is justice. Dale pulled out his phone and dialed. Corey, it's time. Have Marcus and Eugene move to positions Alpha and Beta. Luke should begin phase 2 of the psychological protocol. What are you doing? Angela demanded. Completing your transaction with Guerra. You promised him a child, and he's going to be very unhappy when you arrive empty-handed. The color drained from both their faces as they realized the trap closing around them. You can't send us to Guerra, Shane whispered. He'll kill us. Yes, Dale agreed. He will. Very slowly and very painfully, once he understands that you not only lost his merchandise, but exposed his entire operation to a man with my resources. Dale moved toward the door, leaving them paralyzed with terror. The car is outside. You have 30 minutes to reach the warehouse, or Guerra's people will come looking for you here. I guarantee they won't be as merciful as I am. As he walked away, Angela screamed after him. You're a monster. Emma will hate you for this. Dale paused at the doorway. Emma will never know what happened to the people who try to sell her, but she'll grow up safe, loved, and protected by someone who would burn the world down before letting anyone hurt her. The last thing he heard as he left was Shane's broken voice. What have we done? Oh God, what have we done? Dale didn't answer. They'd made their choices, and now they would face the consequences. In exactly 28 minutes, Angela and Shane would discover that Dale Matthews never bluffed, never forgave, and never forgot. The architect's design was nearing completion. Chapter 6, The Devil's Bargain. The abandoned warehouse in Bridgeport resembled a concrete tomb in the industrial wasteland of Connecticut's Forgotten Coast. Angela's Mercedes pulled into the empty parking lot at exactly 10:15 p.m., 15 minutes late, a delay that hadn't gone unnoticed by the figures waiting in the shadows. Dale watched through military-grade night vision from his position atop a nearby shipping container, communicating with his team through encrypted earpieces. Marcus and Eugene had established perimeter control, while Luke monitored communications from a mobile command center disguised as a maintenance van. Subjects approaching the warehouse. Dale whispered into his microphone. Angela's shaking like a leaf. Shane looks ready to bolt. Guerra's people are already inside, Eugene reported. 4 vehicles, estimated 12 personnel. Heavy weapons confirmed. Through his scope, Dale observed Angela and Shane approaching the warehouse entrance. Their body language screamed terror and desperation, exactly the state of mind he'd intended to create. The warehouse door opened, revealing Gustavo, Guerra himself. At 52, Guerra projected the dangerous charisma of a man who'd built an empire on human suffering. His expensive suit and gold jewelry contrasted sharply with the industrial setting, while the armed men flanking him left no doubt about his true nature. Dr. Dennis, Mrs. Matthews. Guerra's accent carried the refined menace of educated violence. You're late, and I don't see my merchandise. Dale activated the long-range microphone system that would capture every word of the conversation. This recording would serve multiple purposes in the coming hours. There are complications, Shane began, his voice cracking with stress. What kind of complications? Angela stepped forward, attempting to salvage their situation. The child woke up during transport. We had to sedate her again, but she fought the drugs. Our contact at the hospital is running additional blood work to ensure there was no permanent damage. Guerra studied them with the cold calculation of a predator evaluating prey. Dr. Weaver reported no such complications when she called this afternoon. The mention of Grace's name sent visible shocks through both Angela and Shane. They'd assumed their plan was proceeding smoothly, unaware that Dale had turned their own coordinator against them. Grace, what did she say exactly? Shane asked weakly. That the merchandise was ready for delivery at 10 p.m. Yet here you are, empty-handed and making excuses. Guerra circled them slowly, his movements precise and threatening. In my business, reliability is everything. When someone promises to deliver a product and fails, it raises questions about their competence and their honesty. The girl is valuable, Angela said desperately. Healthy, intelligent, from an affluent family. Your clients will pay premium prices for someone of her quality. My clients have already paid. They're expecting delivery within 48 hours to complete their own arrangements. Guerra stopped directly in front of them. The failure to deliver will cost me significant reputation and revenue. Dale smiled grimly from his concealed position. Guerra was performing exactly as expected. A businessman angry about a disrupted transaction, unaware that he was being maneuvered into position for complete destruction. We can make this right, Shane pleaded. Give us another 24 hours. The child will be ready for transport, I guarantee it. Guarantees. Guerra laughed without humor. You guaranteed delivery tonight. Why should I believe your new promises? Because we have too much invested in this to fail, Angela insisted. The information we provided about my husband's company, the access to his client networks, we've given you everything you asked for. Information is worthless if you can't deliver the primary merchandise. Dale's earpiece crackled with Luke's voice. Boss, we've got incoming vehicles. 3 black SUVs approaching from the east. License plates match Guerra's secondary team. The situation was about to become significantly more complicated. Guerra had brought backup, suggesting he'd anticipated problems with this transaction. I'm disappointed, Guerra continued inside the warehouse. Dr. Dennis, you presented yourself as a professional who could handle complex operations. Mrs. Matthews, you claimed your husband was too trusting to discover our arrangement. Yet here we are, dealing with amateur hour complications. My husband doesn't suspect anything, Angela lied desperately. Dale thinks our daughter died during surgery. He has no idea about our partnership with you. Dale's jaw tightened at hearing his name spoken so casually in the context of their betrayal. But he maintained professional composure as Guerra's reinforcements took positions around the warehouse perimeter. Then where's the merchandise? Guerra demanded. Shane's composure finally collapsed completely. The truth is, we think Dale might know something. Our daughter saw us together in his study, saw us photographing his files. We had to accelerate the timeline to protect the operation. Guerra's expression turned deadly. You're telling me the target's father is aware of your activities? No. Well, maybe. We're not sure what he knows. Uncertainty is unacceptable in my business. Guerra gestured to his men, who immediately moved to surround Angela and Shane. The implications were clear. This conversation was heading toward a permanent resolution. Please, Angela begged. We can still deliver. Dale doesn't know about you or your organization. Even if he suspects us, he can't connect us to your operation. Actually, Dale said, stepping out of the shadows with his weapon drawn, I know everything. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Guerra's men reached for their weapons while Angela screamed and Shane dove behind a shipping container. But Dale's team had positioned themselves perfectly. Marcus emerged from the opposite entrance while Eugene blocked the rear exit, both armed with military-grade assault rifles. Nobody moves, Dale commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. Weapons on the ground, hands visible, or this ends very badly for everyone. Guerra showed remarkable composure for a man facing unexpected opposition. Mr. Matthews, I presume, your reputation for tactical planning appears to be well-deserved. Drop your weapons. Now, I think you misunderstand the situation, Guerra replied calmly. You're outnumbered 12-3. My people have families to protect, which makes them considerably more motivated than your corporate mercenaries. Corey, Dale spoke into his earpiece. Light them up. Suddenly, every window in the warehouse exploded inward as Luke's team launched flashbang grenades from concealed positions. The deafening explosions and blinding light sent Guerra's men stumbling blindly, while Dale's team, equipped with tactical gear, maintained complete situational control. In the chaos, Dale moved toward Angela and Shane, who were huddled together behind inadequate cover. "End of the line," he told them quietly. "Dale, please," Angela sobbed. "I'm still Emma's mother. She needs me." Emma needed a mother who wouldn't sell her to human traffickers. Shane looked up with desperate eyes. "I can give you everything. Guerra's entire network, client lists, financial records. I have access to information worth millions. Information I'll extract from Guerra directly." As the smoke cleared, Dale's team had efficiently subdued Guerra's personnel. The human trafficker himself sat zip-tied to a metal chair, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, but his composure intact. "Impressive coordination," Guerra admitted. "Your daughter's safety was never truly at risk, was it?" "My daughter has been safe since yesterday. This was always about justice." "Justice?" Guerra smiled coldly. "You're about to torture and murder 12 people. How is that justice?" "You're right," Dale replied thoughtfully. "It's not justice. It's war." He turned to Angela and Shane, who were now secured with zip ties and watching in terror. "You wanted to know what kind of man I really am? You're about to find out." Dale pulled out a satellite phone and dialed a number that connected him to contacts built over decades in military and intelligence communities. "This is Matthews. Authorization Delta 77. I need a black site extraction team and my coordinates. 13 subjects for enhanced interrogation and permanent disposal." Angela's face went white. "You can't do this. You're not a killer." "I was a killer long before I became a businessman," Dale replied matter-of-factly. "The only difference is now I choose my targets more carefully." The sound of helicopters approaching from the distance marked the beginning of the final phase. Shane began hyperventilating while Angela cursed him with words that would have made seasoned soldiers blush. "Any last words for Emma?" Dale asked them. "Tell her we loved her," Angela whispered. "No. I'll tell her that her parents died in a car accident. She'll grow up without ever knowing she was betrayed by the people who should have protected her most." As the helicopters touched down outside, Dale felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete satisfaction. The architect's design was perfect, and the execution had been flawless. Shane, Angela, and Guerra would disappear into a system designed for people who didn't officially exist. Their fate would be slow, thorough, and educational for anyone else who might consider threatening Dale Matthews' family. Emma would grow up safe, loved, and protected by a father who had proven there were no limits to what he would do to keep her secure. The devil's bargain was complete. Chapter 7: Blood and Revelation. The black site facility, hidden in the Adirondack Mountains, operated beyond the reach of conventional law enforcement. Built during the Cold War and maintained by private military contractors, it served as a place where dangerous people disappeared and uncomfortable questions were answered through methods that courts would never sanction. Dale stood before a wall of monitors displaying 12 separate interrogation cells, each containing one of Guerra's associates. In the center cell, Guerra himself sat strapped to a chair that had been specifically designed to cause maximum discomfort while inflicting no permanent damage. Yet, Angela and Shane occupied separate cells, their initial defiance having dissolved into whimpering terror as they realized the true scope of Dale's capabilities. They'd spent the last 18 hours watching Dale's interrogation specialists extract information from Guerra's network using techniques that reduced hardened criminals to sobbing confessions. Status report, Dale said to Luke Darling, who'd been coordinating the psychological warfare campaign. Guerra's financial networks are completely mapped. We have bank accounts in 17 countries, property holdings, client lists, and operational detail for the last 5 years of human trafficking. Luke consulted his tablet. The bastard's been moving an average of 200 people annually. And the current inventory? 43 people in various stages of the pipeline. Men, women, and 12 children, all awaiting transport to buyers across 3 continents. Dale nodded grimly. Extraction status? Marcus and Eugene's teams have identified all holding facilities. We can liberate the entire inventory within 6 hours and have them in legitimate protective custody before anyone realizes Guerra's operation has been eliminated. Through the monitors, Dale watched Angela pace her cell like a caged animal, while Shane sat motionless in a corner, staring at nothing. They've been forced to witness every detail of Guerra's interrogation, understanding that their turn was approaching. What about their families? Dale asked, referring to Guerra's personnel. Standard protocol. Wives and children will receive generous life insurance payments and relocation assistance. Official story is industrial accident at Guerra's legitimate import business. Dale approved the psychological profile assessments that Luke had prepared. Guerra's people were mostly desperate men who'd fallen into trafficking through circumstances rather than choice. Their families deserve protection, not punishment. Time to finish this, Dale decided. He entered Guerra's cell, where the human trafficker looked considerably less composed than he had 12 hours earlier. Professional interrogation had extracted every detail of his operation, but Guerra's eyes still held the defiant spark of a man who'd survived worse situations. Your network is finished, Dale informed him matter-of-factly. Every account frozen, every property seized, every contact identified and neutralized. 43 people you were planning to sell are now free. You think you're some kind of hero? Guerra spat blood from his split lip. Those people chose to disappear. I was providing a service. The children chose to disappear. Guerra's silence confirmed what Dale already knew. Whatever twisted justification Guerra used for trafficking adults, he had no defense for the children. Your operation generated approximately $12 million annually, Dale continued. Money that could have built schools, hospitals, legitimate businesses. Instead, you chose to profit from human misery. Spare me the moral lecture. You've tortured and murdered 12 people tonight. How does that make you better than me? I haven't murdered anyone yet, Dale replied calmly. That comes next. He left Guerra's cell and moved to Shane's, where his former brother-in-law looked up with hollow eyes that had seen too much horror in the past day. Dale, please, Shane whispered. I know what we did was wrong, but Emma's safe now. Isn't that enough? Dale pulled up a chair and sat facing Shane. Tell me about the first time you sold information to Guerra. It started as a single transaction. Angela found some client files in your study, just basic corporate stuff. Guerra paid $50,000 for the information. And then he wanted more. Security protocols, employee records, financial data. The money was incredible. More than I made in 6 months of surgery. When did trafficking children become part of the arrangement? Shane's face crumpled. Guerra mentioned it as a hypothetical. Said he had clients who would pay enormous sums for untraceable children. But it was just talk until Emma saw too much. She was going to tell you everything. About us, about the files, about the money. We panicked. Dale studied Shane's broken expression. So you decided to fake her death and sell her to child molesters. It wasn't supposed to be like that. Guerra said his clients were legitimate families who couldn't adopt through normal channels. Rich people who wanted children but couldn't pass background checks for minor reasons. Minor reasons like being pedophiles and child killers. Shane began sobbing. We didn't know. I swear we didn't know what kind of people they really were. Dale found himself almost believing Shane's claim of ignorance, which made the betrayal even more infuriating. His brother-in-law had been willing to sell Emma without even bothering to investigate where she would end up. What was the plan after Emma was delivered? Angela and I would disappear. New identities, new lives in South America. Guerra had connections who could make us completely untraceable, leaving me to believe my daughter was dead while you lived on blood money. Shane nodded miserably. We thought you'd eventually move on, maybe remarry. You're successful enough to start over. The casual way Shane dismissed 15 years of marriage and Dale's love for Emma revealed a level of selfishness that defied comprehension. Dale moved to Angela's cell, where his wife stood defiantly despite her circumstances. "Still playing the victim?" he asked. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Angela accused. "Finally have an excuse to show everyone what a controlling monster you really are." "I'm a monster?" Dale laughed without humor. "You tried to sell our daughter to human traffickers. To save her from becoming like you, cold, emotionless, obsessed with control and dominance. At least Guerra's clients would have given her love and attention." Guerra's clients included a convicted pedophile in Bangkok, a snuff film producer in Romania, and an organ harvesting operation in Moldova. Angela's face went white as the reality of her daughter's fate finally penetrated her delusions. That's not possible." Guerra said they were families. Guerra said whatever you needed to hear to get Emma delivered. Angela slumped against the wall, the last of her defiance crumbling. "Oh God, what did we almost do? You almost sold our 7-year-old daughter to people who would have tortured her, raped her, and eventually killed her for entertainment." The brutal truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Angela began vomiting from the horror of understanding what she'd really been planning. "But you stopped it," she gasped between retches. "Emma's safe. Can't that be enough?" Dale considered her question seriously. In the abstract, she was right. Emma was safe. The trafficking network was destroyed. Justice had been served. But the abstract didn't account for the violation of trust, the betrayal of family, the casual willingness to sacrifice their child for money and sexual freedom. "No," he said finally. "It's not enough." Dale returned to the monitor room, where Luke was preparing the final phase of the operation. "Everything's ready," Luke reported. "Guerra's offshore accounts will fund a new charitable foundation for trafficking victims. His legitimate businesses will be sold with proceeds going to law enforcement training programs. And his personal assets will establish a trust fund for Emma's future. And the principals? Guerra will have a heart attack in his cell within the hour. Natural causes, brought on by the stress of interrogation. Shane and Angela will attempt suicide together using smuggled pills. A tragic ending to their guilt over Emma's death." Dale nodded approvingly. The official story would satisfy any investigation while ensuring that no one ever learned the truth about Emma's kidnapping. But first, there was one final conversation to have. Dale returned to Angela's cell, where she sat curled in a corner, still processing the horror of what she'd almost accomplished. "I have a question for you," he said quietly. She looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "If Emma had died during the surgery, really died, would you have felt any genuine grief?" Angela considered the question for a long moment before answering with devastating honesty. "I don't know. I think I stopped loving her the way a mother should when I fell in love with Shane. She became an obstacle to my happiness instead of my daughter." The admission was more chilling than any of the physical threats or criminal conspiracies. Angela had genuinely stopped loving their child, viewing Emma as nothing more than inconvenience to be eliminated. "Thank you for your honesty," Dale said. "It makes what happens next much easier." He left the cell and activated the final protocol. Within minutes, Guerra would be dead from an untraceable cardiac event. Shane and Angela would follow shortly after, victims of their own guilt and despair. The official record would show that a pediatric surgeon and his lover had died by suicide after accidentally causing the death of their beloved daughter during routine surgery. Guerra would have a heart attack brought on by the stress of a federal investigation into his import business. Emma would grow up believing her parents had died in a tragic accident, never learning that they'd tried to sell her to monsters. Dale would raise her with the help of trusted allies, ensuring she became strong, intelligent, and capable of protecting herself. As the monitors went dark one by one, Dale felt the satisfaction of perfect justice. The architect's design was complete, the threats eliminated, and his daughter's future secured. Emma was safe. His enemies were dead, and no one would ever threaten his family again. The blood and revelation had served their purpose. Chapter 8. The Perfect Storm. 3 months after the night that changed everything, Dale Matthews stood in his redesigned study, watching Emma play in the garden through bulletproof windows that had replaced the standard glass. The room bore no resemblance to the space where Angela and Shane had photographed his corporate secrets. Dale had burned everything and rebuilt from the foundation up. Emma seemed to have adapted remarkably well to her new life. The official story was that her parents had died in a car accident while she was visiting relatives, and Dale's cover story had been so thoroughly constructed that even Emma's child psychologist believed it completely. At 8 years old now, she displayed the same sharp intelligence that had nearly saved her life, but without the trauma that could have destroyed her. "Daddy," Emma called from the garden, "Aunt Grace is here." Dr. Grace Weaver had become Emma's unofficial guardian and Dale's closest ally since the operation. Her testimony had been crucial in documenting Guerra's trafficking network, and her medical expertise had helped explain Emma's recovery from her supposed illness. More importantly, she provided the maternal influence that Emma needed while understanding the security requirements that defined their new life. Dale watched Grace approach the house, noting the slight tension in her movement that suggested something was wrong. As Emma's primary care physician and one of only 3 people who knew the complete truth about that night, Grace's concerns carried significant weight. "We need to talk," Grace said quietly as Emma ran ahead into the house. In the secure conference room adjacent to his study, Grace spread out a series of photographs and documents that made Dale's blood run cold. "These arrived by courier this morning," she explained. "No return address, no identifying marks, but the content suggests someone knows more than they should." The first photograph showed Emma playing in their garden, clearly taken from outside the estate's perimeter. The second showed Dale entering his corporate headquarters. The third showed Grace leaving the hospital where she worked. But it was the final document that sent ice through Dale's veins, a detailed timeline of events from the night of Emma's supposed death, accurate to the minute and including details that only someone with inside knowledge could have known. "Who else could have this information?" Dale asked, his mind already shifting into threat assessment mode. "The only people who knew the complete operation were you, me, your team, and—" Grace hesitated. "And there's something I never told you about that night. When I left the warehouse with the equipment Guerra's people expected to see, I was followed. I managed to lose them, but someone was definitely conducting surveillance." Dale's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" "Because I thought it was just Guerra being cautious. But if someone else was watching the warehouse that night, if they saw what really happened—" The implications were staggering. If a third party had witnessed the operation and documented Emma's rescue, they possessed information that could destroy the carefully constructed narrative Dale had built around his daughter's new life. "Have you shared this with anyone else?" "Of course not. But Dale, whoever sent these photos, knows Emma is alive. They know we faked her death, and they know what happened to Angela and Shane." Dale studied the surveillance photos more carefully, noting the professional quality and angles that suggested military or intelligence training. "These aren't the work of amateurs." His secure phone rang, the number reserved for only the most urgent communications. Corey Crane's voice carried unusual stress. "Boss, we've got a problem. Someone just deposited $5 million into the Matthews Foundation account with a note saying it's payment for services rendered." "What services?" "Eliminating the Guerra trafficking network. The wire transfer originated from a bank in Switzerland, but the routing suggests it bounced through at least 6 countries before reaching us." Dale felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in. "Any other communication?" "Just a deposit slip with a handwritten note. Your daughter's secret is safe with us. Consider this a down payment for future cooperation." The message was clear. Someone with significant resources knew everything about the operation and was positioning themselves for leverage over Dale's family. "Corey, initiate Protocol 7. Full security sweep of all properties, complete communications analysis, and activate the emergency relocation procedures." "Copy that, boss." Dale ended the call and turned to Grace, whose face had gone pale. "What's Protocol 7? "Complete lockdown. If someone's trying to leverage Emma's situation, they're about to discover what happens when you threaten my family." But even as Dale spoke the words, he felt an unfamiliar sensation, uncertainty. For the first time in his adult life, he was facing an enemy whose capabilities and motivations were completely unknown. The next morning brought another courier delivery, this time to Dale's corporate office. The package contained a single photograph. Emma walking to school, accompanied by her security detail, taken from an impossible angle that suggested the photographer had been positioned inside the supposedly secure perimeter. The accompanying note was brief. Impressive security arrangements, but not quite sufficient. We need to meet. Today. Central Park, Bethesda Fountain, 3 p.m. Come alone, or Emma's story becomes tomorrow's headlines. Dale stared at the message, analyzing every word for clues about his unknown adversary. The choice of Central Park suggested someone comfortable operating in high-visibility public spaces. The demand to come alone indicated confidence in their ability to control the situation. The threat to expose Emma's story revealed they understood exactly how devastating such revelation would be. By 2:45 p.m., Dale was positioned near Bethesda Fountain, his team providing invisible perimeter security while he waited for contact. The autumn afternoon was crowded with tourists and locals, providing perfect cover for surveillance and counter-surveillance operations. At exactly 3 p.m., a woman approached his bench. She appeared to be in her early 40s, professionally dressed, with the controlled bearing of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Most striking were her eyes, intelligent, calculating, and completely familiar. "Mr. Matthews," she said, settling beside him on the bench. "Thank you for coming. Do I know you? Not personally, but you knew my husband very well." She pulled out a photograph of Gustavo Guerra. "My name is Melissa Guerra. I was Gustavo's business partner long before I became his wife." Dale's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon, but Melissa raised her hand peacefully. "I'm not here for revenge," she continued. "Quite the opposite. I'm here to offer you a partnership." Partnership? My husband's operation was profitable, but limited by his lack of imagination. You eliminated him and his network with surgical precision, rescued 43 trafficking victims, and covered your tracks so completely that no one suspects what really happened. Dale remained silent, waiting for her to reveal her true intentions. "I've spent 3 months analyzing your methods, studying your security arrangements, researching your business practices. You're exactly the kind of partner I need for my next venture." "What kind of venture?" Melissa smiled coldly. "Justice. My husband was a small player in a much larger game. There are networks of traffickers, corrupt officials, and child predators operating across the globe with complete impunity. They need to be eliminated, and I need someone with your particular skills to help me do it. And if I refuse, then Emma's story becomes public knowledge. Your business empire collapses under investigation, and she grows up knowing that her father is a vigilante killer who destroyed her family." The threat was delivered with casual precision, confirming that Melissa Guerra represented a level of sophistication Dale hadn't anticipated. "But if I agree, then Emma remains safely anonymous. Your business continues to prosper, and together we eliminate some of the most dangerous predators on Earth. You get to protect innocent children while I get revenge against the animals who corrupted my husband's legitimate business interests." Dale studied Melissa's face, searching for deception or weakness. "What makes you think I'm interested in becoming an international assassin?" "Because you've already started. Guerra's network was just the beginning. There are hundreds of operations like his, thousands of children at risk, and no one with the resources and ruthlessness necessary to stop them." She pulled out a tablet displaying photographs and documents. "This is the Kowalski Syndicate operating out of Prague. They specialize in children under 10. This is the Yamamoto Group in Tokyo. They run forced organ harvesting operations. This is the Petrov Collective in Moscow. Their clients prefer live entertainment that doesn't survive the experience." Each image was more horrifying than the last, showing the scope of international trafficking that law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't address. "You could spend the rest of your life protecting just Emma," Melissa continued, "or you could help me protect thousands of children who don't have fathers capable of saving them." Dale closed the tablet, his mind processing the implications. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A partnership. Your tactical expertise and resources, my intelligence networks, and international connections. We identify trafficking operations, eliminate the principals, rescue the victims, and disappear before anyone realizes what happened. And Emma, remains completely protected, better than protected. She grows up in a world where fewer monsters prey on children. Dale stared across the fountain at families enjoying the autumn afternoon. Parents pushing strollers, children feeding ducks, couples walking hand in hand. None of them aware of the horrors that Melissa's tablet had documented. I need time to consider this. Of course, but don't take too long. The Kowalski Syndicate is planning to move 20 children next week. Every day you delay means more victims. Melissa stood to leave, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Matthews. I know you're wondering how I survived your operation against my husband's network. The thought had occurred to me. I was never part of Gustavo's trafficking business. I ran his legitimate operations while he handled the uglier side of things. When you eliminated his network, you actually did me a favor. I inherited everything without the complications. And now you want to use those resources for vigilante justice. I want to use them to finish what you started. The question is whether you're brave enough to become the kind of father Emma really needs. One who makes the world safer for all children, not just his own. As Melissa walked away, Dale remained on the bench, staring at the tablet full of horrors. She was right about one thing. The Guerra operation had been just the beginning. There were monsters operating around the world with complete impunity, and conventional law enforcement couldn't touch them. But accepting Melissa's partnership would mean embracing a life of perpetual warfare against an endless enemy. It would mean raising Emma in the shadow of constant danger while using her safety as justification for becoming something more dangerous than the criminals he hunted. The perfect storm was gathering, and Dale Matthews had to decide whether to seek shelter or ride it to its ultimate conclusion. Emma's laughter echoed across the park as she played with other children, blissfully unaware that her father was contemplating becoming the world's most dangerous man in order to keep her world safe. The architect's design was about to expand far beyond anything he'd originally imagined. Chapter 9. The New Kingdom. 6 months later, Dale Matthews stood on the balcony of a penthouse overlooking Monaco Harbor, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean while Emma practiced violin in the music room behind him. The girl had taken to their new international lifestyle with remarkable adaptability, treating their frequent travels as grand adventures rather than security necessities. The transformation had been complete and irreversible. The public Dale Matthews, CEO of Matthews Security Consulting, had suffered a tragic family loss and thrown himself into philanthropic work, establishing foundations that supported law enforcement training and victim advocacy programs around the world. The private Dale Matthews had become something else entirely. The Prague operation was flawless, Melissa Guerra said, joining him on the balcony with a glass of wine and a satisfied expression. 20 children recovered, the Kowalski Syndicate eliminated, and the Czech police are crediting improved international cooperation for the breakthrough. Over the past 6 months, their partnership had evolved into something more efficient and deadly than either had originally imagined. Melissa's international connections and Dale's tactical expertise had created a network capable of striking anywhere in the world with surgical precision. Any complications? Dale asked, though he already knew the answer. Their operations had become so sophisticated that local authorities usually thank them for their assistance without realizing they'd been manipulated. None. The evidence packages we planted will keep Prague investigators busy for months, and the victims are already in protective custody. Most will be reunited with their families within the week. Dale nodded, feeling the familiar satisfaction of another successful mission. The Kowalski Syndicate had been operating for 15 years, trafficking children across Eastern Europe with complete impunity. Their elimination had probably saved hundreds of future victims. What's next on the list? Melissa consulted her tablet, scrolling through intelligence reports from their global network of sources. The Nakamura Group in Kyoto is planning a major shipment. 40 children destined for clients in Southeast Asia. We have a window of opportunity when they consolidate the merchandise for transport. Timeline, 2 weeks. I've already arranged for Emma's placement in the International School of Geneva while we're operational. Dale had initially resisted involving Emma in their lifestyle, but Melissa had convinced him that hiding their activities would only create suspicion. Instead, Emma believed her father's frequent travels were business-related, while their security arrangements were explained as necessary precautions for wealthy international families. The strategy had proven remarkably effective. Emma was learning 4 languages, receiving world-class education, and developing the cultural sophistication that would serve her well in any future she chose. More importantly, she remained completely unaware of the violence that protected her innocence. "There's something else," Melissa continued, her tone becoming more serious. "Intelligence suggests the networks are starting to coordinate their defenses. They know someone is systematically eliminating trafficking operations. Coordinated how? Shared security, mutual early warning systems, collaborative efforts to identify the threat. They're adapting faster than we anticipated." Dale had expected this development. Criminal organizations that survived long-term did so by learning from their losses and improving their defenses. The fact that multiple networks were now cooperating suggested their campaign was having significant impact. Are we compromised? Not directly, but they're getting smarter about operational security. The next phase will require more sophisticated approaches. Melissa pulled up a world map on her tablet, showing red pins marking known trafficking networks and blue pins indicating their successful operations. The visual was striking. They'd eliminated 17 major operations across 4 continents, but dozens of red pins remained. "We need to evolve," Dale said, studying the map. "Bigger operations, higher value targets, more significant disruption to their coordination efforts." Agreed. But that means greater risks and more exposure. Are you prepared for that level of escalation? Dale considered the question while watching Emma through the glass doors. She was 8 now, beautiful and brilliant, and completely trusting in her father's ability to protect her. The life they'd built was perfect in its way. Constant travel, unlimited resources, world-class education, and the satisfaction of meaningful work. But Emma wouldn't remain a child forever. Eventually, she would ask harder questions about their lifestyle, their resources, and the reasons for their security arrangements. Dale needed to ensure that when that day came, he could provide answers that wouldn't destroy her faith in the world. "The Yamamoto Group in Tokyo," Dale said finally. "What's their operational scope?" Melissa swiped to a detailed intelligence report. "Forced organ harvesting, primarily children. They maintain surgical facilities in Tokyo, Bangkok, and Manila. Annual revenue estimated at $50 million. Client base: wealthy individuals needing transplants who can't or won't wait for legitimate donors. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders who've destroyed their organs through lifestyle choices and want discreet replacements." The images that accompanied the report were nauseating. Clinical photographs of surgical procedures performed on unwilling victims, financial records showing payments for specific organs, and video footage that confirmed the commercial nature of the operations. Eliminating Yamamoto wouldn't just save the immediate victims, Melissa continued. It would send a message to every other trafficking network that no operation is too large or well-protected to be vulnerable. Dale closed the tablet, his decision made. Start planning. Full operational deployment, maximum impact, complete elimination of the network. That's not a small operation, Dale. Yamamoto has government protection, Yakuza connections, and international clients with their own security arrangements. We'll need a larger team and significant resources. Then we'll recruit a larger team and commit whatever resources are necessary. Melissa smiled with genuine admiration. You've changed since we started this partnership. 6 months ago, you were a businessman seeking revenge for a personal attack. Now you're becoming something much more dangerous. I'm becoming what Emma needs me to be. And what's that? Dale looked back at his daughter, who was now reading a book in 3 languages simultaneously, a skill that never failed to amaze him. A father who understands that protection requires more than just defensive measures. Sometimes you have to eliminate threats before they can develop. The Tokyo operation will establish us as a global force, Melissa said. After Yamamoto falls, every trafficking network in the world will know we exist and will be actively hunting us. Good. Let them hunt. It will make identifying and eliminating them much easier. As if sensing their conversation, Emma looked up from her book and waved at them through the glass. Her smile was radiant, innocent, and completely trusting. The smile of a child who believed her father could protect her from anything. Dale waved back, making a silent promise that her faith would never be disappointed. The world was full of monsters who preyed on children like Emma, but those monsters were about to discover that someone was hunting them with unlimited resources, military precision, and absolutely no mercy. The conversation was interrupted by Dale's secure phone. Corey Crane's voice carried unusual urgency. "Boss, we've got a situation. Multiple intelligence agencies are starting to connect our operations. Someone leaked information about Prague, and they're building a pattern analysis." "Which agencies?" "FBI, Interpol, and what looks like a joint task force including representatives from every country where we've operated." Dale felt the familiar tightening in his chest that preceded major tactical decisions. Discovery by law enforcement would complicate their operations, but wouldn't necessarily end them. Governments had their own reasons for wanting trafficking networks eliminated, even if they couldn't officially sanction the methods required. Assessment: mixed. Some of them want to arrest us, others want to recruit us, and a few seem interested in just staying out of our way. The problem is coordination. They're starting to share information about our methods and targets. Dale made his decision with the same calm precision that had characterized every major choice in his life. Initiate Protocol 9. Full diplomatic engagement, complete transparency about our humanitarian objectives, and formal partnership offers for agencies that demonstrate appropriate cooperation. You want to legitimize the operation? I want to control it. Better to have governments as partners than as adversaries. After ending the call, Dale turned to Melissa, who had been listening with growing excitement. "You're not just eliminating trafficking networks," she said with admiration. "You're building something larger. An international coalition dedicated to protecting children through any means necessary." Emma deserves to grow up in a world where monsters are afraid of the consequences of their actions. And you're prepared to become a consequence? Dale looked out over the harbor, where yachts worth hundreds of millions of dollars floated peacefully in the evening light. In one of those vessels, he knew, there were probably victims being transported or clients planning their next atrocity. The beautiful surface masked horrors that most people couldn't imagine. "I already am the consequence," he said quietly. "The question now is whether the world is ready for what comes next." Emma's laughter echoed from the music room as she discovered something amusing in her multilingual book. The sound was pure joy, unmarked by any knowledge of the darkness that surrounded their perfect life. Dale Matthews had begun this